Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third meeting of the Audit Committee. As we have quorum present, I call this meeting to order. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest? Please indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. Seeing none, I'm going to hold here for a moment, and I'm just going to offer the Auditor General a special point of privilege here. She wanted to make a quick announcement before we get into the meeting.
Yes, very quickly. You know, we often say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a village to prepare a report. And within my office, there's a lot of helping hands. But one of the key people who has been helping over the last 8 to 10 years as a civil servant of 18 years with the city is Carolyn Garamoni. She is retiring to join her husband, who has retired after 9 years previous to her. But she is the person who actually makes us look good. She makes sure the reports look beautiful, the presentations look great. I think many times we underestimate our admin staff, and many times they are the strategic arm of our organization. They often have a lot of insight because they see things from a different perspective. So I want to wish her congratulations on her retirement. She was too shy to come today. She's back, still working her very last day in the office, and I just want to thank her for all of her service.
And I would just take a moment to say, I think every councillor around this horseshoe right here knows that in order for us to be successful, we rely on the helping hands that are in our office and the professionals that we have helping us, and really even further the city staff. And I know that I've worked with Carolyn a number of times in working with the Auditor General, and know her to be a professional, know her to be incredibly helpful. And I think, you know, the success of this committee is due in part to her work, and I really appreciate it and wanted to say my thank you as well on the record. So best wishes to Carolyn. I'll now take a motion to confirm the Audit Committee minutes from May 3rd, 2019. Councillor Matlow, all those in favor? That is carried. We've got 18 items on the agenda today. Let's run through them. AU 3.1 financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2018. Agencies and corporations, Part 1. Now, we do not have speakers registered on this, so are there any members wishing to hold these items or ask questions? All right, may I take a motion that recommends that City Council receive for information the 2018 financial statements and related documents for the following agencies and corporations: Exhibition Place, Toronto Parking Authority, Toronto Public Library, Toronto Transit Commission, Toronto Zoo. Councillor Ford? So moved. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. AU 3.2 Business Improvement Area BIAs 2018 Audited Financial Statements, Report Number 1. Are there any members wishing to hold? I do wish to hold that item, so I think we'll be relatively quick on that. There's a motion for it, so I'll put that in my name. I think we just need a moment to get that finally ready. AU 3.3 Arenas 2018 Audited Financial Statement. Are there any questions on that item or members wishing to speak to it? Again, I do wish to place a motion. I think it will be rather quick, so I'm going to hold that in my name. AU 3.4 Community Centers 2018 Audited Financial Statements. Are there any members with questions or wishing to speak to that item? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to recommend that City Council receive the 2018 audited financial statements of community centers attached to the report. Councillor Nunziata, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. AU 3.5, status of the financial statements audits of the city's agencies and corporations for the year ended December 31st, 2018. Are there any members wishing to ask questions or speak to the item? So again, I do have a motion on that. I think it will be relatively quick, and I'll put my name on that as the individual holding it. AU 3.6, Auditor General's 2019 status report on outstanding audit recommendations for city agencies and corporations. Councillor Fillion. AU 3.7, 2018 audited consolidated financial statements, City of Toronto. We both have a speaker and a presentation on this, so we'll hold that. AU 3.8, Trust Funds 2018 Audited Consolidated Financial Statements. Are there any members wishing to speak to or to ask questions on that item? Seeing none, may I have a motion that City Council approve the 2018 Consolidated Financial Statements for the City of Toronto Trust Funds as attached in Appendix A of the report? Councillor Nunziata, all of those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. 3.9, Sinking Funds, 2018 Audited Financial Statements. Are there any members wishing to ask questions or speak to the item? Seeing none, may I have a motion that City Council approve the 2018 Sinking Fund Statements as attached in Appendix A of the report? Anyone wishing to move that? Councillor Ford. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. 3.10, Auditor General's 2019 status report on outstanding audit recommendations for city divisions in infrastructure and development services. Councillor Fillion. AU 3.11, pension, payroll, and employee benefits, update on AU 7.2 PPEB audit recommendations. Are there any members wishing to ask questions on that item or speak to it? Seeing none, may I have a motion that Audit Committee receive this report for information? Councillor Matlow, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. AU 3.12, establishment of the city's cybersecurity program to enable vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. Are there any members wishing to ask questions? Councillor Fillion. AU 3.13, audit of city cleaning services, outstanding recommendations of greatest concern. Are there any members wishing to hold that item? Councillor Ford. AU 3.14, opening doors to stable housing. An effective waiting list and reduced vacancy rates will help more people access housing. There's a presentation and a speaker on this item, so that will be held. AU 3.15, engineering and construction services, phase 2, construction contract change management controls should be strengthened. Are there any members wishing to ask questions? Councillor Ford. AU 3.16, audit of interface invoice payments, improving contract management and payment processes. Are there any members wishing to ask questions or speak to this item? Seeing none, may I request a member to move the staff recommendations? Anyone? Councillor Matlow. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. AU 3.17, previous audit reports, common themes and issues. I'll just get some advice from the clerk on. I'm being advised that the recommendation is to place a motion to withdraw the item. May I have a member place that?
I'm sorry.
Madam Auditor, I wonder if you could provide comment on the reason that we're going to withdraw AU 3.17.
Oh, require a bit more time. I had a late report in relation to the ransomware where we had to conduct extra work that came up unannounced. So I require a bit more time. That'll be there in October. Thank you.
May I take a motion to withdraw the item? Councillor Ford. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. And finally, AU 3.18, process to obtain external audit services for 2020 to 2024 inclusive. I'll just look to the clerk for advice. Do we need to put a motion to receive? So may I take a motion to receive the item? Councillor Matlow. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried.
Mr. Chair, may I just say a brief comment on a point of privilege?
Certainly, Councillor Matlow, point of privilege.
Just a little more than a month ago, Premier Ford made some statements about the work of the Auditor General and the work of this audit committee that were, in the words of our chair, damaging and misleading. And it is not, I would say, it's fair to say, typical of Councillor Holliday's comfort level to speak out when a Conservative government may do something that is adverse to the work that we're doing. That being said, though, he stepped out of that comfort level and demonstrated remarkable leadership and courage, especially in that context. So I just want to acknowledge the work of our chair, who, when there were unfair statements made and when there was sort of politics being thrown at us in that way, Chair Holliday took, I think, a very admirable stand, and I just want to acknowledge that publicly.
Thank you very kindly, Councillor Matlow. I really appreciate that. And as you can see by the by that statement, I take pride in this committee, and I owe the success of this committee to my colleagues that sit on it. And I'm just going to check with the clerk here if we've got those motions ready, so if we can get those items released and get people on their way in time for the long weekend. Okay. The clerks are advising me that we just need another moment, so I'll see if, with the permission of the committee, jump. That's very kind of you. I am going to acknowledge that I'm going to acknowledge that I did hold AU 3.5, and I had made an error in my notes. Councillor Fillions kindly held the item that I was targeting. So I will take a moment here to bring up AU 3.5, status of the financial statement audits of the city's agencies and corporations for the year ended December 31st, 2018. I do not need to hold that. So do any members have any questions or wish to speak on that item? Seeing none, I will take a motion to implement the staff recommendations in the report here. Councillor Nunziata, all of those in favor? Any opposed? And AU 3.5 is carried. We'll just check. We still need more time on those? We good to go? All right. So we'll go to AU 3.2. Business Improvement Areas 2018 Audited Financial Statements, Report Number 1. I'm just going to double check if anyone had any questions about this. So I'll speak to it very quickly, and I'll place this motion. I'm going to place a similar one in a moment. I will take note that Koreatown and Queen Street West BIAs had some outstanding audit recommendations. And I've been thinking very carefully about what this committee does with outstanding audit recs. So my request with the support of the committee is that we have those BIAs give us some more information on how they're going to address those recommendations that are found in the management letters attached herein. Are there any questions about this particular motion?
Outstanding audit issues.
So in the deep in the financial statements that are attached here, a couple of the BIAs have management letters, and in the management letters are audit recommendations, similar to what we would find from our Auditor General in the reports. And a few of them have been persistent. And I think we want to make sure that we balance out the role of the committee to point those out and make some requests to the BIAs that they deal with those matters so that they don't come back year after year. And we'll ask the Auditor General to report to us on the status of that process. All of those in favor of the motion before us? And that is carried. And so then it would be the item as amended. All those in favor? And that is carried. We'll go to AU 3.3. Arenas 2018 audited financial statements. I had also held that, and I also have a similar motion. We can have that put on the screen. In the financial statements, there are things that come up in the management letters, audit items, and so I'm asking that those arenas, or all arenas really, look at the outstanding matters and speak to the Auditor General on what the progress is on implementation of those, and then we'll have a report back. So all of those in favor of the amendment? That is carried. And the item as amended? That is carried. All right, AU 3.7, City of Toronto 2018 audited consolidated financial statements. We have a speaker. And I will ask Henrik Beckman to come forward. Good morning, Henrik. Good morning. Welcome to the Audit Committee. I see we're just getting a laptop set up there. Excellent. We'll just give you a moment there to get that going.
Thank you.
So again, welcome to the Audit Committee. I don't know if you've deputed before, but you've got 5 minutes, and we'll have a clock running there for you. Are you all set to go?
I'm having some trouble with my cursor, but
It's no problem. Just take a few moments here to make sure you're up and running.
We also have a copy of his deputation.
Just to let you know as well, the materials you submitted have been circulated to the committee, committee members. So we should all have that on our desks.
okay. So, good morning. I'm just here to make a proposal for a very simple change to the actual format of the consolidated statement of operations and accumulated surplus, which is part of the audited statements. Who am I and why am I doing this, you may ask? Thank you very much. I'm a retired software developer. I have an interest in making financial information of the city as accessible as possible to the people of Toronto. So for years now, I've been looking for ways to help with that. Some of you may have heard of Budgetpedia at budgetpedia.ca. I worked on that for quite a few years. But the reason I'm here today is that probably the simplest thing that can be done to improve the communication of the city's status to the people of Toronto, and for that matter to councillors and staff and everybody else, is what I'm about to suggest. And that is a change of format to the to this statement of operations. As most of you, or probably all of you, are well aware, all revenues of all types appear in this statement of operations and surplus, whether it's money that's coming in for capital investments, or money that's coming in for operations such as the daily operation of the city and of the transit and so forth. We're having lots of fun with my computer here. The problem is that the expense portion of that operation statement really only relates to the daily operations of the city, whereas the revenues, as I've just noted, include both capital and operations revenue. And therefore, the surplus is sort of muddled because the surplus combines or conflates money that's coming in for capital purposes, which is nothing to do with operations or not directly, with surplus for operations. And it turns out that there's a very simple fix for that. In the absence of a screen, if you were just to go to the second page of my presentation, you'll see what I'm talking about. Yes, that one. The short story is that if we just move the capital, the revenue that's dedicated to the capital portion of costs to the bottom of that statement, then that will isolate the operational aspects of the financial statements. In other words, that will leave as the top line revenue item only revenue that comes in for operations. And so the result would be that the first surplus that's reported at the bottom is in fact only a surplus for operations. What's the advantage of that? Well, it's easy to tell just at a glance for anyone, you know, where we stand as far as operations go and isolate the money that we get for capital. So if you go to, so let me just say that this is not something I've made up myself. This is actually something that's being done in other cities. And I thought the easiest thing to do would be to give some examples of that. So I think if you go to the third page of my presentation, you'll see a statement there by from Calgary. Yes, with the red box there. And I also can't see that myself because I'm having cursor problems here. But anyway, as I recall, just above the red box that I've added, you'll see that there's a slight deficit of, I think, $70,000, you know, more or less they break even. Do you see that there? Whereas, and then underneath that, they add the capital portions of the revenue so that it's clear that that is money coming in for other purposes. And then at the bottom, I believe there's a surplus for all purposes of $1 billion. So, I mean, it's really a very simple thing that I'm suggesting for the format here. To isolate the capital portion of the revenue at the bottom of that statement so that people can see at a glance really what it is. In the case of the Toronto audited statement, I think you'll see that there's an annual surplus there of $1.4 billion. I think on the first page of my presentation, I've looked at, I've made a copy for you of item 20 of the notes, or note 20, which shows that about $1 billion of that revenue in terms of transfers from governments is in fact earmarked for capital. So in fact, what's reported there is the annual surplus of $1.4 billion is actually closer to $400 million from operations. You know, we certainly have the money for of $1 billion for those capital items. So I'm simply saying that making that very small format change on the statements would make it, oops, I'm over time already, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
But making that very small change would make it clear to everyone at a glance what's going on.
Thank you for speaking to us. May I ask, are there any questions of the committee? Questions of staff? So I'll ask a very quick one. Do you know, is there a governing standard that applies to municipal reporting? And do you have any, obviously you've got some in-depth knowledge on this. Are we following a different standard than the other cities in the way that we present? Or do we have ultimate flexibility?
I believe that probably all or most municipalities, and from what I can see from these other statements, I didn't actually look it up, follow the PSAB, the Public Standards Accounting Board, which is a national body of accountants, academics that sets the standards that we're talking about. From what I can see from the layout of the statements of the other cities, they also follow that standard. I'm sure it's in those audited statements. I didn't actually look specifically, but I'd be surprised if they don't. It's a national standard. I'm pretty sure that certainly all major municipalities follow that standard. Reading the notes of the financial statements, from what I understand, is that the auditors rely very much on management for their information, and to some extent for the format that a particular city would want to follow. So again, I'm sorry I can't cite a particular item, but I have to infer that because it's used in a number of cities, and by the way, not used in other cities, so I looked at Montreal and Vancouver, and they don't do this,
Okay.
although I think it's very easy. But I have to infer that, that there is latitude within the PSAB to allow for this, this standard. And I mean, Calgary, Edmonton, and Winnipeg, I think, are the three cities that I've shown, and they surely would follow the standards that Toronto does.
Now, I acknowledge I failed to start my timer, so I'll limit myself to one small last question. The government transfers is a very large piece of money in here, right?
Yes.
3.5 billion. Would it be required that number be broken down all the way down the tree, right down to the smallest, finest grains, in order to split the difference between capital and operating? So it's more than just a line item, it would be a fundamental change in the accounting roll-up. And I'm assuming it can be done, but
Sure.
that in essence is what you're saying, is you've got to pull out the government transfers and identify the capital versus operating, and then I think it would make a fundamental difference on what the annual surplus comes out to be.
Well, yes, I mean, it would make no difference in the very bottom line in
Right.
terms of the money, but it would
One up.
certainly make a difference, and a meaningful difference, a very meaningful difference at the top line. There's a report which is presented with the annual budget, which has a very long and obscure name, and I've never been able to memorize it, but the Ontario government requires Toronto to cast the annual budget in accrual terms, if anybody knows what that is. And up until this year, every year that report has included a line item that says in the budget, assets that are dedicated to, revenue that is dedicated to capital projects. So I have to assume from that, going over the years, that's been presented all the time, since they're able to present that information from a budgetary point of view, that would also be available for the actual numbers that come up. So again, you'd have to check with the accounting people, but my inference, and certainly my hope, is that this is a very simple change that simply has to be made at the top, could be done with a minimal amount of effort. And again, the benefit, I think, is quite large in the sense that it does make very clear what the operational surplus of the city would be. So again, I'm sorry, I don't have a specific definitive answer, but I think it's very, very likely that the information I'm suggesting is readily available.
Thanks very much for speaking to us today. Just check, are there any other questions? Wonderful. Thank you again for coming to the
Thank
audit
you.
committee. Okay, Councillor Matlow, you had indicated a desire to question staff. We've got the auditor here, we've got management staff, and I believe we have PwC here as well.
Well, my question actually is in the same line, rather than the specific.
Pardon me, Councillor Matlow, I'm sorry, the clerk has reminded me that we have a presentation as well.
Oh,
So we might, I'm going to propose that we hold the questions to that, because then we can get into all the pieces. My apologies, it's Friday, and it slipped my mind that we got a presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Manel.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor?
Good to go. Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Audit Committee. My name is Andrew Flynn. I'm the Controller of the city. I have with me Sandra Calafiretti, who's the Director of the Accounting Services Branch, and we're pleased to be here to present the city's consolidated financial statements. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have 3 members of PwC, our auditors, here in the audience, being Michael Houghton and Kathy Russell, who are the engagement partners, and Umar Farouk, who is the audit manager. The staff report included in the package that accompanies the financial statements provides the details and highlights on the financial statements and hopefully helps to give some meaning to the numbers. So with that introduction, I'll ask Sandra to kind of walk us through the presentation.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning. Mr. Chair and members of Audit Committee, I'd like to take you through the city's consolidated financial statements and provide some highlights of the 2018 financial position and the results for the year end. The statement of financial position, or actually the consolidated statements consist of 4 major statements. The statement of financial position is the city's balance sheet, which reports on the city's financial assets and financial liabilities, its non-financial assets, the deficit between the city's financial assets and liabilities, which is called net debt, and its accumulated surplus. The statement of operations and accumulated surplus is the city's income statement, where we report revenues, expenses, and results for the year. The consolidated statement of net debt outlines the difference between the annual surplus and the change in the net debt position. And the consolidated statement of cash flows reports where the city's cash came from and how it was used. The financial statements also contain notes which disclose our accounting policies and further details on each balance, and they are also an integral part of the consolidated statements. So the city's consolidated statements include all entities controlled by the city. There are 122 entities consolidated into the city statements, which include all city divisions, 21 agencies and corporations, and 101 smaller entities, such as the BIAs. Also included is the city's proportionate share of the Toronto Waterfront Corporation and the Toronto Pan Am Sports Centre. And finally, the city owns a 100% investment in 2 government business enterprises, which are separate, self-supporting entities, legal entities. These are Toronto Hydro and the Toronto Parking Authority. There are distinct roles and responsibilities as part of the financial reporting process. Management is responsible for internal controls and sound financial management and the preparation of these statements in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. The external auditors perform evaluations and testing of critical financial systems, and they perform other tests in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards in order to express an opinion on the financial statements. An audit committee, which is what we have before you today, is required to approve these statements prior to presentation to council. We just wanted to highlight a few differences in how transactions are accounted for in the financial statements and in budgets. The financial statements must be prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting standards, as set by CPA Canada's Public Sector Accounting Board. As a result, we use full accrual accounting in recording transactions and in preparing the financial statements. Budgets, on the other hand, are prepared primarily on a cash basis. A second major difference is the treatment of tangible capital assets, which are used to provide city services. For budget purposes, TCA are expensed in the year they are acquired or developed, and for accounting purposes, they're capitalized on the balance sheet as non-financial assets and written down over their useful life. Before I go into the highlights, we just wanted to highlight some major differences from the 2017 statements in the 2018 statements. Prior to 2018, the city recognized its investment in the Toronto Portland Company as an investment in a government business entity. Shareholder direction changed on January 1st, 2018, which resulted in a reporting status change for TPLC, meaning that the city needed to now account for it differently. Under PSAS, TPLC changed from being an equity pickup as an investment to an agency status that required line-by-line consolidation. So we replaced a $383 million investment line with the value of assets, liabilities, revenues, and expenses. In addition, TPLC is now required to follow PSAB the contaminated site standard, which is PS 3260, resulting in a $56.6 million environmental and contaminated site liability recorded in the books. This liability reflects management's responsibility to mitigate risk through management or containment of contaminants on TPLC-owned properties, and is consistent with the other contaminated environmental liabilities recorded by the city. In addition, in order to support the city's climate action strategy, Transform TO, our consolidated statements for the first time contain an unaudited note that outlines the city's greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets to 2050, along with the city's reduction progress to the end of December 31st, 2018. So I'd now just like to give you some financial highlights. So the statement of financial position reflects that the city has financial assets totaling $11.3 billion. 30% of those assets are investments in government bonds and money market instruments which bring revenue to the city. 19% is our investment in Toronto Hydro and the Toronto Parking Authority, and 51% consists of cash balances, accounts receivable, and taxes receivable. Our liabilities total $19.4 billion. 76% of the $3.8 billion accounts payable and accrued liabilities balance relates to trade payables. So these are payables that we owe to organizations doing business with the city. $3.8 billion is deferred revenue, a large portion of which is the balance in development charges and park levies. These are revenues that are received, or cash that's received by the city, that's not taken into revenue until the transaction that gave rise to it actually occurs. $6.8 billion is long-term debt and mortgages for the city, agencies, and corporations. So debt is issued for the acquisition and construction of tangible capital assets which are required to perform city services. And $4 billion is the value of the city's employee benefits liability, which consists mainly of health and post-retirement medical and dental obligations. The city's net debt is $8 billion. The net debt is the difference between the total liabilities and the financial assets. And this is an important measure for cities and all governments because it's the value that represents the amount that must be financed from future revenues. But it's important to note that within this balance is the net long-term debt and mortgages, which are essential to the development or construction or an acquisition of tangible capital assets. The non-financial assets consist mainly of tangible capital assets. So of the $33.3 billion balance, 32.7 is tangible capital assets. And the city's accumulated surplus is $25.2 billion. So just very quickly taking you through four aspects, four line items. Net long-term debt and mortgages includes both debentures and mortgage debt obligations. In 2018, the city issued a net value of $937 million in debt and made $331 million in repayments. Employee benefits liabilities represent amounts payable to third parties or employees in future years based on employee credited service from the current or prior years. And these payables relate mainly to workers' compensation, long-term disability, and health benefits for early retirees, and benefits for those retirees covered by the city's legacy pension plans. The net liability increased by $129 million, or 3.3%, which was primarily the result of employee benefits for the TTC and the Toronto Police Service. The city's net debt of $8 billion increased by 13% over 2017's balance. And as mentioned earlier, this value is extremely important to municipalities as it represents payments that must be funded from future revenues. But again, a reminder that this includes the net debt that's required to acquire the assets or construct the assets needed for city services. And non-financial assets, as indicated earlier, mostly represents the city's investment in tangible capital assets. In 2018, the city recorded $3.5 billion in tangible capital assets, either acquired or developed. And as the city uses these assets, they're written down over their expected useful life. So in 2018, we recorded amortization in the statement of operations of $1.2 billion. Just want to highlight a few things from this, the statement of operations and accumulated surplus. So this is the city's equivalent of the income statement. In 2018, on a consolidated basis, the city earned $13.7 billion, which consisted mainly of property taxes, user charges, and funding transfers from other governments. And the expenses incurred totaled $12.3 billion, mostly in transportation, social and family services, the protection of persons and property, and recreation and cultural services. The difference between revenues and expenses is called the annual surplus, which was $1.4 billion, and that value gets added to the opening accumulated surplus for an ending accumulated surplus of $25.2 billion. So, Mr. Chair and members of Audit Committee, these are the city's audited consolidated financial statements presented to you for approval.
So thank you, Councillor. Just a couple of concluding remarks. It's important to note that the audit opinion that PwC will be issuing is what's referred to as a clean opinion. In other words, it's an unqualified audit opinion that demonstrates that we've presented the financial statements fairly in accordance with all material respects. The information that is provided in the financial statements is comprehensive enough to support the city's credit rating of AA to AA+. As Sandra has pointed out in the conversation, we've a lot of our net debt is associated with the continued investment in tangible capital assets, so in roads and bridges and all of those types of things. Those will continue to be measures and strategies that we have to continue to consider as we continue to maintain the city's financial sustainability. And the last thing I just point out is that for the 11th year in a row, the financial statements are going to receive a Government Finance Officers Award for financial reporting. And the last thing I'd just like to point out is the preparation and the presentation of the financial statements is a long process, and I'd just like to note a couple of staff who are here with me in the audience. So Stella So, Manel, Danielle, and Chris Phillips and their teams have put a tremendous amount of effort into the preparation of these financial statements. That's our report, if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. I'll now ask the committee if members wish to ask questions. Councillor Matlow, I'll start with you.
Well, allow me to begin by reiterating that gratitude to all of you who've worked on this. I can imagine that when we see a few slides, that is really just the end result and a minor reflection of the magnitude of work that you've done. So I really appreciate that. So I'm going to ask, it might go to you or perhaps somebody else in the room, but do we know of a municipality in the world, roughly Toronto's size, that isn't carrying billions of dollars of debt?
So
Pop quiz today.
Pop quiz. Councillor, I'll be honest, I don't know of any municipality of any size that has the capital requirements that the city does, that would not have a significant amount of debt. And I guess I'd go to the point of saying that most accountants would tell you that when you're making a long-term investment, you also use debt resources to do so. So
Would you characterize the debt that we have for capital priorities good debt or bad debt?
I would characterize it as good debt. So just in the context of, I don't know your personal financial situation, Councillor, but I presume you borrowed a mortgage to buy your house. I would put our situation in exactly the same place, that we don't have the resources to make the massive capital investments that we we need to do, so we need to borrow to do so.
Although I know technically it's good debt, when I have to pay it, I consider it bad debt, but I digress. Could you remind us roughly how much does it cost the City of Toronto to service that debt, the debt that we have
We'll get
annually? I'll ask you another question while you're looking that up.
Certainly.
I'm going to move on to how we share and display the consolidated audits and also our budgets every year. Each and every year, and this kind of alluding back to Mr. Beckman's deputation, each and every year when it's budget time, I hear from residents, and this has been going on for years, that the average layperson has no idea what the heck we're reviewing. The difference between the operating budget and the capital budget and the rate-based budget, and what really is our debt and what is not, and what is our surplus. And then we find out that we have a surplus, but we don't really have a surplus because we're also servicing the debt. And
Yes.
so has there been in recent times a review of best practices, both domestic and internationally, for how to better provide information both to council, the mayor and the council, but also to the public, whether it be through open data, whether it be through other practices, as was suggested through the deputation, just to make it an easier, digestible read for the average person who doesn't have your education?
Yes. So, Councillor, I recognize that it's extraordinarily complicated. It's not just complicated for the average person, it's complicated for everybody. The difference between our financial statements and the budgets are often has to do with forecasting and budgeting for the cash needs of the organization is different than the accounting recognition, and that by itself creates a difficulty. So from a budgeting perspective, we have to budget for cash purchases that in our financial statements are treated as an asset, the capital asset and the capital program being the largest that we talk about.
Just to be clear, though, has there been a review of this in recent years that you're aware of? Or?
So that's an ongoing process. The budget modernization process that the city is going through right now is attempting to address that to make things easier to be understood.
Okay.
That's something we're always striving to do, is to try to make this understandable, recognizing that it is significantly challenging.
And with the time remaining, if I may, did you find an answer to my?
Yes, it's about 300 million.
300 million. And is it, because I always hear that it's, and this is the average person talking, right? That there's an assumption that we should always be, a city like ours should always be carrying billions of dollars of debt.
Yes.
That being said, though, while it may be a good debt because we are contributing to capital priorities, we still have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to service it, which isn't going to all of our other priorities every year. So, some will say it is critical that we pay down that debt as quickly as possible. This is a burden that our kids are going to be inheriting. What say you as professional auditors? Is it reasonable to continue carrying billions of dollars of debt, or should it be government, no matter what their stripe or ideology or partisan label, but should it be a priority to pay down that debt so we have fewer dollars having to go into servicing?
So, Councillor, I guess a certain amount of good debt is required for an organization of our size, and capital improvements to need to be made. So the question always becomes, yes, we're servicing the debt, $300 million a year. However, that's allowed for substantially larger investments in capital assets. So the point would be, if we don't have that debt and still would like to make those capital investments, we would have to find revenue from other sources, which the city does not have those revenue tools to be able to continue to make that investment.
Thank you.
So the debt is a tool, and it's only a tool to continue to make the investments in capital assets.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion.
Thanks. So because I have no financial background, I tend to look at these things in a perhaps overly simplistic way, but I'm really concerned about the 13% increase in debt, which looks like it's about more than $500 million. And I know that tangible assets have gone up, but they're tangible assets that we're never going to realize the increase in the value. We're not going to be selling them, I assume. So on the one, so on a balance sheet, it might look okay, but the fact is you have one that's increasing in value, but you don't ever realize that value. And on the other side, you have this, an extra $500 million in debt that you do have to at some point somehow pay off. So did and I don't want to get into a budget discussion that's part of, the purview of the budget committee, but did the auditor raise any concerns about our rapidly increasing debt level?
So, Councillor, I guess the point would be made, yes, our debt has increased by the amount you described. Our capital asset purchases was in the tune of $3.5 billion. So that was the rationale and the reason for why the debt has increased by that net amount. The auditors have not, to my knowledge, and expressed any concern about that increase of debt, again, because of why it was purchased. And the other thing to point out is that the debentures are a long-lived debt, so they match the life of the assets that we're receiving. So the financial statements reflect the annual realization of the value. That's what the amortization expense does. It writes off that value of those capital assets over their life. So that between those two things, I recognize your concern about the increasing debt. However, it is over a long life. It's matched by the life of the assets that they were used, that we borrowed against. As a matter of fact, our debt can only be used to finance certain types of capital assets so that they are matched in that context.
Again, as my last question, because I won't, two questions, but shouldn't it be matched against ability to pay it off?
So the continued operations of the city do allow for that to be paid off. That's the debt service that Sandra mentioned, that even with that debt service included in our financial statements, we still have a surplus.
And is it the job of the auditor to raise red flags, or that's really not their job? They're just making sure everything balances?
No, the auditor's job, if they had a concern about the manner in which so it would not just be the external auditor's responsibility, it would be management, and it would also be the Auditor General's obligation to bring forward to the Audit Committee that we have a concern around the relative financial sustainability of the city.
Thank you. Just a question of, I guess, either the chair or the Auditor General. Do either of you meet privately with the auditor to say, everything looked good here? Did you get full cooperation? Everything on the up and up?
Yes, we do on a regular basis, and if anything comes up, we make sure it's resolved. If there's issues to bring to the table, we would bring them to the table. So we do meet regularly, yes.
Good. And I hadn't thought that there would be issues. I just think it's a good practice. So I just wanted to make sure we were doing it at some level.
So, not yet. Were there any other questions? Just check. So I had a couple. I guess the first one I wanted to ask was, I think it's to PwC, because Mr. Beckman brought up a point about the detail in the way that we provide the financial statements. So I'll start with PwC. I wondered if you could offer some comment, Michael, on why it is reported the way that it is, and if management wanted to add to it, I'm welcoming that. But we'll start with the auditor, and maybe you can speak to the standards.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I can confirm that the presentation and the current draft of the financial statements for the City of Toronto, this is a common presentation. It is in accordance with public sector accounting standards. The presentation suggested by the speaker is also allowable under public sector accounting standards, and it would be management's preference as to how they would best like to present the statement of operations for the city.
And was my sense about this, because I'm not involved in this process, somewhat accurate, that it's more than a single line item on the final presentation, but you would have to look far deeper down the line when you looked at the government transfers to split out the accounting on capital versus operating. So a lot of work does go into the number to roll up to enable to separate it as was suggested.
Yeah, so to clarify, there would be no impact on the annual surplus for the city. Essentially, what I understand is being requested by the speaker is geography of the capital government transfer portion in the statement of operations. So what's being suggested is to move it down below later on into the statement as to show operating surplus as one line, as one subtotal, and then including any capital related transfers to arrive at annual surplus, which would not change to what's been reflected here. So it's geography between two line items.
And the speaker, I take it, was accurate as well in that other municipalities may choose to report this differently. He had brought up other examples where, I guess it was Calgary and other places, they do address the geography differently as you put it to us.
Yeah, again, so we haven't, Mr. Chair, looked at those other sets of municipalities' financial statements, but it would be allowable under public sector accounting standards.
Okay. And if I just turn over to management, I mean, you've given this due consideration about how these numbers are organized. Is this something that you explore or management considers in the preparation of these statements?
So in the preparation of the financial statements, from a perspective of, we would look to consistency as well as common treatment. And as Mr. Houghton has indicated, this is a common presentation. Certainly, we could look into the request. There would need to be, as part of the consolidation roll-up, a consideration of the definition of what is a capital versus an operating type of expenditure. It wouldn't be quite as simple as just taking government transfers associated with capital and putting it down in the one line. We would have to make sure that we matched the revenue and the expenses.
Right, so you'd have to plan for this,
That's
really is what you're saying. That you'd have to embark on the process with this in mind. It's
Yes.
not, you wouldn't change the report at the end. You would process this, you would work through this process with that end goal in mind.
Absolutely.
Okay, I wanted to ask something a little different. Item number 24 on the notes talks about greenhouse gas emission reductions, and I took note of that. I mean, it's a little bit different than the financials, and I wondered if you could provide comment to the committee on why that's in there.
Certainly. And this is actually accountants trying to be cutting edge, Councillor. The Accounting Standards Board is looking at how to move forward with respect to greenhouse gas emissions type disclosures and including them in regular reporting. We've taken an initial first step in this context of setting what the city's targets are and the progress that is being made. It is still very much new disclosure, and it's disclosure that the accounting industry is working through. But we've taken a bit of a lead in this context, and I know the CFO is working with her colleagues across the communities and also internationally about trying to make this kind of disclosure common in financial statements to give cities an opportunity to make disclosures that are relevant for the future.
Great, thanks very much. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, those wishing to speak, I know Councillor Matlow, you would.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have a motion, and the motion is that City Council request the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer and the Controller to review the city's budget documents and consolidated financial statement the city's budget documents and consolidated financial statement are prepared with a view to increasing transparency and the ability of members, staff, and the public to easily understand the city's financial situation. This review should include current best practices in place nationally and internationally and enable the financial statement to be an open data item. Further request the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer to report on this initiative to the Audit Committee prior to the budget cycle of 2020. As I said during my questions, and I think all of us have heard this over the years, I would imagine, that the average person living in Toronto who want to understand whether it be our consolidated financial statements or during budget time when we are reviewing our overall budget, struggle to understand the difference between our operating budget, our capital budget, our rate-based budget, what debt we have, why we have that debt, what it's really going to, and also, do we have a surplus, and how do we have a surplus when we're still servicing debt? And there's a lot of these questions that the layperson will ask that they struggle to really understand based on how the information is provided to them. And I've heard for years that just while it by nature is a complex subject, it doesn't have to necessarily be presented as complex as it is. And I'm curious to know whether or not there are best practices we can learn from elsewhere that do a better job than we do. I like how this motion also refers to members and staff too, because I think admittedly there are members of council who also struggle to understand fully the city's financial statement. And I think the easier it is to digest and understand, the more informed the debate and the opinions will be. And then hopefully the better decisions we'll make. So this is about transparency, it's about democracy, but ultimately it's about better decision making when we actually know what we're reading and what we're talking about. The other thing I wanted to note during my time is, as you could hear earlier, I'm really interested in the whole concept of debt because I hate debt, and just the word alone, I think makes all of us feel uncomfortable. I had an experience in my early 20s when I got myself into a really bad situation with credit card debt, and it took me years to climb out of that hole. And that experience hit me so hard that I just cannot carry a balance month to month on my credit card. I feel uncomfortable doing that. Like the moment, typically even the day that I use my credit card, I'll go online on my mobile and I'll just like transfer money from my checking account and just pay off that balance, like just so mentally I know I'm not carrying it. Not everybody has that opportunity. Some people struggle to like pay it off for years. I was in that situation. But I feel uncomfortable personally carrying debt, and I bring that same mentality to my work in public life, being a trustee of the city's finances. That being said, I do recognize the argument that that when we have pressing capital priorities and needs, and you simply don't have the revenue available or any other place to use to get money immediately to pay for critically important capital investments, and often there's timing involved when rates are low and you have a moment where you can purchase what you need for the future. Those are the times you need to do it, and those are the times you need to get. You got to incur some debt to be able to make those investments, and I get all that. But when I learned that we have to pay roughly $300 million each year in servicing that debt, it does make me think about what you could use that money for each year, other than paying off our collective credit card. So I conclude by saying that I recognize that we need to have debt at certain times, but I also don't think that we should just feel comfortable with the status quo, that that's just the way it always has been, and that's the way it will always be, and that's the way it should be. I would submit that we do need to look at a combination of what the city can do to have a reasonable diversity of revenue tools to actually pay now for the things we need and have a clear line of accountability about what we invest in and whether it be fees or taxation that we have. I would also submit that we have to always look at our priorities. I'm not going to, I'll end on this. I know that, for example, the Scarborough subway is a controversial issue. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole today, but it's just an example, though, of where we have debates over priorities, that perhaps if we didn't spend those hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on certain things, they'd be available for maybe more pressing priorities that we could spend the money more wisely on. So we have to get a grip on our priorities, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow. Anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none, I'll just take a quick moment. I do have a motion. It's a precise one. It speaks to the consolidated financial statements that we have before us today. I'm going to say a couple things. Thank you to everybody that's worked on this, and I want to specifically thank our speaker for coming today. I think it's a fairly significant subject, and I think you've sparked some interest and some conversation about that, and I know that it is covered in Councillor Matlow's motion about looking at best practices, so I think this will go on for a little while. I also wanted to make the point to look at the open data, and the genesis of this really came from a PhD researcher that spoke to me earlier this week about her work understanding the city's finances and budgeting process, and she pointed out, there's a ton of data out there, including budget data, but for some reason the financial statements are not there yet. And I thanked her for pointing that out, and I had a quick conversation with staff, and I know that there's a process around qualifying something for open data, so I'm just going to ask that we embark on that process and give consideration to these consolidated statements, and hopefully we can get the ball rolling on that. And I will also take a time to make a special note. I did have an opportunity to talk to the CFO about the inclusion of greenhouse gas emission reductions into the consolidated financial statements. And I understand there's a lot of change going on in the world, and I understand that we are leaders on this front, and I think the City of Toronto should be proud of that we're beginning to include this type of information into our statements and put it out there in public. And I think that's just worth noting in wrapping up this item. Without further ado, I'll ask that we vote on the two amendments before us. First is Councillor Matlow's. All those in favor? That is carried, and the second is mine about the open data. All those is in favor? That is carried, and the item is amended. All of those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. We're going to go to item 3.6, which was held by Councillor Fillion. Just get the title of it here. Auditor General's 2019 Status Report on Outstanding Audit Recommendations for City Agencies and Corporations. Councillor Fillion.
So I held it for a couple of reasons. The first is I assume someone needs to move the, I didn't know if the recommendations in the Auditor General's attachment automatically got moved, or whether that had to be held in order to move them. So in any case, I will move them. And then I guess a question of the Auditor General regarding the TTC, and we have a large number of outstanding recommendations, and I did not, frankly, try to wade through them all, especially in light of your recommendations that this be forwarded to the Audit and Risk Management Committee of the TTC. So it's just a question about our responsibility as the Audit Committee when recommendations aren't implemented versus the TTC and its committees. Like, who should be doing that work?
So it really should be the agency or corporation, in this case the TTC Commission Audit Committee, who should be monitoring the implementation of the recommendations. But there's also a role of oversight when they're not getting done, because ultimately, it is the city who will pay where, if there's money that can be saved, and you have to continue to fund. So there's an oversight role. In relation to the audit committee was concerned about the procurement items, and there are many that have been outstanding for 2 years. There are the potential for high savings. They have been independently verified by E&Y. And so the audit committee asked for a timeline for TTC to be making sure those recommendations are implemented. So the audit committee recognized the importance of its role, but it's concerning that we still have 53 items outstanding. Really, it's the only agency or corporation that hasn't really moved along on all fronts, so.
So would a reasonable approach be so we refer it to their Audit and Risk Management Committee, but you would continue to report to us on whether or not these recommendations are implemented, and at some point, if we think we need to draw to council's attention that they're not being implemented, we would do so. Would that?
100%, and you may even want to have an update in October as you move into budget discussions, whether some of these that have some savings attached to them have been implemented, especially around the procurement items, which have some savings. So you may want an update for October when I come back here, and then...
Sure, and should that be added to the recommendation that's in the attachment, or a separate recommendation?
You might need to make a separate recommendation.
So I conferred with the clerk. We need to, well, the recommendation is that we forward this to City Council for receipt. So if we wanted to prepare additional instructions, we'd have to take a motion for that, to ask the Auditor General to come back and report on a different time cycle, because we know that the AG will report cyclically on outstanding items. But if we wanted to move that bar up to October so that we could deal with it quicker and bring more specifics to council's attention, we'd have to do that. So if it works for you, we can stand the item down and you can prepare a motion to do
Sure.
that. Or did you have other questions about specifics in the report?
No, if we're doing that, I don't want to take up a lot of time today, because I haven't gone through this in any detail because it's going elsewhere. But yes, I would like to make that motion.
And the attachments are the attachments. We're just simply sending the report with information on what those items are to City Council otherwise. So there wasn't a second disposition of the attachments to it.
So, yeah, so does the recommendation in the attachment need to be moved, or no, it doesn't? It just happens?
Right, they were previous recommendations,
Okay, okay.
right? So we can stand that down for a
Sorry,
minute?
it's dated May 15th, okay, yeah.
Yeah, we can certainly stand that down for a minute if the committee's okay with that. And I think the next item we've got on the list is yours as well. And, sorry, we'll deal with that because the staff are still here from the agencies. So Councilor Menziata, did you want to pose your question?
We're going to ask questions on 6 later on.
I think we should deal with them now, because we're getting close to just dealing with your motion, which is a request for a report back. But if the staff are in the room, I think we should deal with those questions right now. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, I'm really concerned about the outstanding recommendations that, I mean, and a lot of them are quite old, right? I mean, they've been, so with the TTC, what we came forward during the budget, and I believe a couple months ago at the audit committee about the fare invasion, that audit that you're doing with TTC, is that part of the outstanding recommendations? Because it really concerns me that we're finding these efficiencies and then they're not being implemented. And how can we force them to implement these recommendations? Or who has the the authority to do that.
Thank you. So we've got a couple of questions
Yeah.
in there. So the first thing is, when an audit is just completed, like the fair evasion, we don't do a follow-up on that until a little later. And what I can say is that they are moving forward on that front, on the fair evasion front report. So that's a more recent report, and they are moving forward on that report. The report that I was referring to was the one about cores procurement, and there was quite a lot of money, and it was about 2 years ago. That report seemed to kind of stall a bit, the recommendations there. The audit committee has asked them for a timeline, but I think it's important that the message be sent that it's important because of the savings potential to move that along, so because you're in a situation where you may need to make sure that those monies are in the kitty.
So how can we, I mean, it seems like they're not implementing those recommendations. Like, what can we do, like, to force them to do it? Do these reports come through the TTC commission? Like, it really concerns me that we find these efficiencies, there are recommendations, and they're not being implemented, so where there's no savings. Like, how can we force this to happen?
So it goes through the TTC Audit Committee, then it goes to their board, then it comes here. So if management's here, I mean, maybe the clerk can tell you how to
I
implement
mean,
it,
what's the
but
point
it's
of us
really-
finding these efficiencies if they're not being implemented?
It's council's role to hold management to account. So if management's here. Is TTC management here? Oh, hi.
Can we get a mic?
I am an audit manager with our internal audit department. We've recently expanded a little bit to the audit risk and compliance department. Historically, we have not had a huge role to play in ensuring that management has specific action plans and deliverables around the AG's recommendations, but I think that with added resources and the expansion of our department, we can play a larger role in ensuring that management comes to the table and making continuous progress on these recommendations. So I can tell you that on August 6th, we have a 3-hour session with our executive management to review just this, materials management and progress on cores. So I think that's a definite positive improvement. I think we should note, though, that a lot of progress has been made on these audit recommendations, and the AG unfortunately only reports things as being fully implemented. But if we look to some of the materials management improvements, we can see that there has been a $3.69 million savings in the year alone from certain improvements. So.
Yes, can I call on Tara? You were at the management meeting. What was the comment on the material procurement recommendations?
Who's talking?
I'm sorry.
Who's talking?
I'm sorry. It's the TTC.
I'm here on behalf of Tara Ball, the head of our
Your
internal audit department.
voices, I don't know where they're coming from.
Your room today, yeah.
Hey? I know, that happens.
Happens to all of us.
That happens. So when we go through our next budget cycle, I'm going to see on TTC that there has been revenue and that we've actually saved money, like we found efficiencies. I don't have to ask that when we go through the budget process. I'll have a line item on the savings.
So that's a question for us. We will put the line item in. It's management's responsibility to make sure that they implement the savings. And could I ask Tara, who was at the meeting, to comment on the progress on these recommendations, and what was the comment from the CFO?
So at the time of the meeting, there was a comment that there hadn't been the time to address them, and there had also been a change in staff. But I believe there is another TTC management here that has been making some progress since the time of that meeting. So I don't know if they want to speak to it.
So we were getting conflicting. It wasn't really moving along. It's moving along now. It's great to see.
So I'm looking forward to those line items. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata. Are there any other questions? I understand, Councillor Filion, your motion's ready, so we can go to speakers on this item.
Yeah, well, I think it's sort of self-explanatory. I think it's a good idea to have this. We're talking about large amounts of money and potential savings, so we should be keeping an eye on it. So report back in October would be prudent.
Very good. All of those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? That's carried. And on the item as amended? All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Okay, we're now at AU 3.10. Auditor General's 2019 status report on outstanding audit recommendations for city divisions in infrastructure and development services. Councillor Fillion, you had held this item.
Thank you. So a couple of things. So I had some difficulty following the chart. So I couldn't figure out what the discrepancies from one chart to another and what the dates were, like in table 1, for example, it's status of outstanding recommendations as of December 31st, 2017, and then under that, results of 2019 follow-up, and then table 2. So I'm not, it looks like there is a large number of ML&S outstanding items, but I can't really, it sort of depends what chart you look at, or the pie chart, or I just had trouble following that.
So I'll give you just a quick explanation. What we do is we give the opportunity to implement. So we say for the reports that are outstanding at the end of 2017, we list the number of recommendations, what was outstanding, and of the ones that were outstanding at the end of March 2017, how many have been implemented, how many are still outstanding, and how many are no longer applicable because maybe they changed a business practice and we have determined that it's no longer applicable. So that's, and yes, you are correct. There are municipal licensing standards. There are a number that, like 12, that are not fully implemented. So they're older ones from before December 2017.
So through the chair, I can speak to the MLS ones. Certainly there is one back from, I think, 2013 that's outstanding, but the balance are actually coming from an audit report that was done in October of 2017 that was focused on a couple of sections of Chapter 545 dealing with holistics and body rub parlors, both of which were responded to in part as far as the bylaw review goes recently at GGLC and was then returned to staff.
So just to follow up on that, I understand we're dealing with the holistics. Hopefully, we're dealing with the holistics. But so if you remove those, how many are outstanding?
So through the chair, there was a part 2 to that audit from October of 2017 that also dealt with eating establishments and nightclubs, and it looks like there may be 3 outstanding in that regard. There is one from a far earlier audit dealing with investigation services overall, some of which is relying on some technology changes, hopefully, for case management. I think that covers them all.
Yeah, there's not a lot.
Okay. And then just, I guess, questions of the Auditor General on the high priority outstanding recommendations. And I guess this is a question of you, Mr. Chair, as well, because we're kind of feeling our way through this process where I think this is an important function that we're doing to go back and look at what hasn't been done, but it really is hard slogging to go through all of this and try to figure out the status of all the recommendations. So I appreciate the high priority ones to focus on. I guess then a question of the Auditor General, which of these might we want to delve into further, or should we delve into all of them further? Or are you just leaving it up to us, which is fine as well? I would certainly know which ones I would tend to pick out more, but just your thoughts on if we had to, if we wanted to do 2 of these per agenda, I don't think we can do more than that. Which 2 would you pick?
Well, I would pick the 2 that are on page 7. So you will see we star them. And we star them because they were picked out on the items of greatest concern report, and they are still outstanding. And in this case, they're both old, and there's potential assets or money or things to come to the city. So the first one relates to Section 37. It's from 2011, and it's to make sure that whatever we were promised in Section 37, be it cash, parks, buildings, services, we actually receive that. That all has a value, and that's been outstanding since 2011. And then 2012, the building permit fees, improving the controls and reporting to make sure all the fees are in place. And appreciating that Will Johnson is just fairly new to the building portfolio as the chief building officer, but I certainly think that we star them as high priority. They're still here and they're older, so I think that they would be ones where you may want to unpack it a bit more at a future session.
Sorry, through the chair, I can advise on the city planning outstanding item. It will be coming to committee in September.
Thank you. And Councillor Phelan, I guess you'd asked questions of the chair, and I'll offer the following comment. I think duly noted by the chair and members of the committee, there's a growing interest in dealing with outstanding audit items, and that's shown up in the comments and the motions that we've seen over the last couple of audit meetings. I think there's an important distinction between the role of the Auditor General to follow up and report on outstanding audit items, which is an important process, and we see those rotate through the divisions and come as reports to this meeting, to this committee, and we also see an annual report on that. But the Auditor General doesn't control the implementation and completion of those items. The auditor can only assess whether or not they've been done and bring them to our attention. I will let you know that I'm going to speak on this item with a motion because I think one thing that's missing is our request of management to report back to us on the progress on these items. And I think that there's value in turning our eyes towards the management with some requests for more detail on how they're working through them, and also a request on the timelines, because the timelines is the piece that the Auditor General doesn't evaluate. The auditor only comments on the information that she gets. So hopefully that's helpful and sort of spells out where I think we're going to head with this item in a moment. And did you have any other questions, Councillor Phelan?
I don't think so.
Okay. Any other members of the committee with questions of staff on this item? Seeing none. Any members of the committee wishing to speak to the item? Councillor Phelan?
Yes, well, I would, and I haven't seen your motion, but I'm guessing that I will like it.
I hope so. Fingers crossed.
Okay, so I guess procedurally,
You gotta let me
doesn't
place it
quite work,
first.
but I was going to move, given that that there's going to be a report to planning in September, I was going to skip one, and I was going to ask that we delve more into 2 and 3 at our October meeting. So that is not in conflict with your motion, I assume, right?
If I may vary the procedure a little bit and interject, I think that's entirely in order, and I know that we've done that at the committee before. We've asked for specific reports on particular items, and I'll point out on this agenda there are specific reports from management as opposed to the Auditor General on the status of certain outstanding items. They're in here. They were very precise, yes. Right?
So I will move then that I'm not, does clerks want to work out the, suggest the appropriate wording? Items numbered, sorry, they're not numbered. Toronto Building Division, building permit fees, and Toronto Building improving the quality of building inspections. So one department with two parts. And I'm assuming that it's a bit early for paving contracts, or is it?
I'm actually hoping to have an update. I am pleased with the movement on that,
Yeah,
for sure.
So
Okay.
just building department then.
All right, I know the clerks are going to work on those motions as quickly as possible, so I'll take a chance to move my motion as well and get that onto the floor, and depending on how long this takes, we may need to just hold the item. As fast as they can type. Did you want to speak to the item, Councillor Matlow, and see if we can just keep the agenda moving, so.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly just commend, both, I completely support both of your motions, and I've had the same experience even going before our current AGs, during your predecessor's time, where, there'd be this big report and often, controversial but important revelations, and then we would make our big speeches and move our big motions, and there'd be big media reports on it, and it'd be a thing, and then immediately management would say, we absolutely accept every one of the recommendations, we are on this, we are completely responsible, everything's going to be great. And then, the way our attention spans in our city works, we get on to the next big controversial issue, and then all the attention's on that. And I have never any idea really what actually happened. So I think Chair Holliday's motion is correct, that it's not really our AG's responsibility to kind of go back and say, hey, did you read my report? Did you act on my report? Hey, what about my report? We're the ones who hold our staff accountable and ask them what they did and if they did it. And I think this is really important, that we not only do our follow-up, our accountability actions, but also set clear timelines for when we expect for that information to come forward. And I would say, by the way, just alluding to the other item that we're withdrawing today, it's always helpful for us that whenever we ask staff or an independent accountability officer, anyone, for timed items to come at certain months or whatever, that if they're not going to come, that we be told that it won't and why, or else these things seem to fizzle away, and then it's only if we stumble upon it or get reminded of it, or if that issue comes up in the media again and we're all like, oh, wait a sec, whatever became of that. That's not the way that this should work. There should be some systems so that if we are holding, and to come back to this item, like if we're asking our staff to tell us at a certain date, what have you done, that it really be done in April, if we say April, and if it's in May, then it comes in May, and if they don't have time to do it, or they have other reasons why it can't come at that certain time, they should come and say, we really are working on this, but there's a little more work we have to get done, and we'd like another couple of months, and that's fair, and that's reasonable.
Well, I think we're getting close, but I see the motions being brought over, so I wondered if I could get my motion onto the screen and give me a moment to speak. So I'll just state my motion. We're going to ask the city manager to report back to the next audit meeting, October 25th, 2019, on a process to track and report on a quarterly basis, so cyclically, progress on management's implementation and their target completion date of outstanding audit recommendations, with particular emphasis on those that the Auditor General has identified as items of greatest concern. And I want to differentiate and take a moment. Well, I'll start out by saying, given that it's a very aggressive reporting date on this process, October, it should signal that this isn't my idea. I know that management has been thinking about this on how they track and deal with the really long list of outstanding matters. And, where they are in the continuum of being implemented, and it's very complicated. But I also am aware, as a member of the committee, that there is this growing interest, and it's been shown through the motions and through the conversation that we've had at this table. And I want to differentiate the request of management from what the Auditor General does. And I mentioned it briefly in my comments. The Auditor General comes back and looks at the implementation of these items and verifies them, and then puts that into a report. And also from time to time, she will look at whether or not an item that has been endorsed by council and put forward to management is still applicable. And those reports will continue to go through on a cyclical basis. They're regular. We get the master report once a year, but we also get an examination, a deeper examination of the various components of the city, meeting after meeting. And included in that is a discharge of those particular items that council has asked management to do, but have found, they don't matter anymore because things have changed. And through the adoption of council, those are brought off the table. But what we seem to be missing in this process because of the additional interest is the focus on the progress being made by the management team and the divisions of implementing things before they reach the Auditor General. And it takes some time to reach the Auditor General and go through the process to be verified. So I think this committee wants to be closer to the latest information on this. And the other piece that's really important in here is that we are looking at the dates. At some point, management, and it's likely in the original finding, will set a date and a target for the execution of that recommendation. But if you look at some of the reports, you find those dates tend to move over time. And there's really good reason for that. Management, are often doing their best to implement these things, but I think it's a fair question to the committee on behalf of council, why did it change? And are we happy with that change? Do we accept it? So this report and this process will help us do that. So I realize it's going to be a very busy month in October based on the motions that we put forward. This is going to be more reading for the committee members, but I think there's genuine interest there. And I hope you'll support this motion, and I hope you'll find it helpful. And I also hope staff doesn't find it too burdensome, because I know that they're already doing this process. We're just asking for the report on top of it. So with that, if it's all right, with a nod of the clerk, we'll go back to Councillor Fillion, who also had some motions that we wanted to put out there so that we can wrap up this item. Councillor Fillion?
Explanatory, just the two of the items that the Auditor General highlighted, both of which relate to the building department.
Thank you. All right, on Councillor Fillion's amendment, all of those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. On my amendment, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. And on the item, as amended, all in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Next item is AU 3.12, establishment of the city's cybersecurity program to enable vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. Councillor Fillion, you had held the item.
Yes, and are we dealing with 12 and 12A?
Yeah, 12A is a sub-report to it, so we
Yes.
look at them at the same time.
Okay, and the recommendations in 12A are automatically, I would need to move those? Okay, so I will move those. Oh, no, sorry, I'm asking questions.
You got questions?
I'm
Yeah.
asking questions, yes. So, a question of staff, and I'll preface this by saying when I took the Rotman Director's course last year, which I would recommend to anybody who hasn't taken it, they spent a very large amount of the course time on cybersecurity threats and said this is one of the most important oversight roles for any board of directors. It's absolutely essential and critical, and you all need to absolutely make sure that your organization is 100% on top of this. So, so questions of staff, I'm not sure who, where. on a scale of 1 to 10, how fully prepared is our organization?
Yeah, hi, through the chair, Councillor Fillion, I'm behind you. It's Grant Coffey from INT. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say we're between a 7 and an 8. There are certainly activities and things that are ongoing and are as articulated in the report, and it will continue to evolve.
And how soon will it take us to, I assume we want to reach 10, how long would it take us to get there?
To get to a 10, I'm not sure I could actually articulate a firm timeline. However, there are some key activities as articulated in the report, in particular the moving to a managed security service provider, which will be in place by early 2020. That will be a big step in our maturity in terms of being proactively prepared for the future. So I think that will get us above an 8. And I think we'll continue to work with the Auditor General and on our program to ensure that it has the right scope and oversight to get to a 10.
So I have, if one had concerns that that wasn't good enough, what additional steps would need to be taken?
We'd certainly be open to having a conversation further with yourself, Councillor Fillion, or with any other councillors with regards to that. And we are continuing to evolve our cybersecurity plan and how that fits into the broader context, for example, of how we're delivering IT services at the city, managing risk in that context as well. So it's part of a broader picture.
So we had an audit recommendations in 2016, so it's more than 3 years later. I don't know where you would have estimated the number back in 2016, but it seems, based on the amount of time to get us to a 7 or an 8, it would appear that there is not a sense of urgency about this.
Through the chair, I can reiterate that this is one of the top priorities for the Information Technology Division, and so we do see it as a very important matter and are focused on achieving results to continue to get better.
I see in the report there was a request for a proposal issued May 15th. How long had that been in the works for prior to being issued?
So we started working on that version of that proposal earlier this year. So really it was in the works for approximately 4 to 5 months. The original, some of that work did commence last year as well. We had changed our approach to the procurement earlier this year to try and expedite and get a solution that will actually allow us a little bit more flexibility and latitude in terms of longer term needs.
Don't have much time left. Question of the Auditor General. When was it that you kind of went in and tested how easy it would be to break into our system?
I believe it was back in 2016, March 2016. I'll have to see, but it was a while back. It was one of the first projects that I worked on. Syed?
Yeah, it started in December 2015.
Yes.
And then we continued in 2016.
Correct, and we briefed the entire way through.
Yes, yes.
And do we have any reason to think that that couldn't still happen?
Until management can provide the assurance that they are ready, the answer is yes. We will be doing our testing. We've starting now to get our work together. We hope to report out in October to convey where we think, whether we're 7 or 8, and whether we've moved along since then. But this was the #1 issue for me when the new city manager came in. It's been outstanding for a while, and you've seen the video, so.
Thank you.
I'll give Councillor Ford an opportunity to ask questions on this. You had indicated an interest.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So on this report, I think Councillor Fillion had really good questions and actually answered a lot of what I had. I just have notes throughout this. So your recommendation in terms of cybersecurity awareness and training, will that be mandatory for all City of Toronto staff or optional?
So the cybersecurity awareness and training at this stage has not been rolled out as mandatory, but it can be considered for mandatory. So the intent is to have regular training for all staff available, and then there are other components to the awareness and training program.
Would it be staff's recommendation to make that training mandatory, as it is such a significant modern day concern?
So we would support a recommendation to make that training mandatory.
Okay, so I will write up that motion in the meantime. But moving on, so we aren't the only city, of course, there are cities around the world who are grappling with these issues, and other governments and businesses. So are we looking at best practices in the sector and what other governments are doing to protect their own intellectual or infrastructure? If you will?
Sure. So through the chair, yes, we are. So one of the activities that's highlighted in the report is a cybersecurity maturity assessment, and that's an independent assessment being done by KPMG based on an internationally accredited cybersecurity framework, and it will give us an understanding of where we sit maturity-wise across a number of different elements. So yes, and that is part of that is looking at other jurisdictions and how they address similar matters.
Right. And my last question, one of the recommendations in the previous report was to create the Chief Information Security Officer. Is that you, sir, or?
No,
That has
just to
not-
clarify for the committee, through the chair, I am not the Chief Information Security Officer. That position is actually in recruitment right now.
Okay, and when do we see that person to be brought on board?
We are targeting now that person brought on board this summer, later in the summer.
And what's their reporting structure?
So the Chief Information Security Officer will report administratively to the CIO, or the Chief Information Officer, and functionally to the City Manager.
Okay.
So if I could just respond, Councillor Ford, through the chair. We will be working through that diligently as quickly as we can, because the individual needs to be in here as soon as possible, so we understand that. So I'll be part of the process in order for the individual to be here within the next month or so. We're going through the process with a recruitment firm right now.
Right.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much.
I'll ask him. Are there any other questions? I'm going to ask a couple. Great, thank you. I think to you, Madam Auditor, I'm going to try to summarize my memory on previous reports on this without drifting into the details that, you may not have reported on or would have been in the confidential attachments. But I suppose generically with IT systems and security, there's three kind of components. There is the design and the architecture of how things are set up and configured. There are tools and assets and functions, antivirusware might be one of them. And the third is the human side and human behavior, right? Can somebody talk somebody into giving out their password, and all of a sudden, never mind the design of the system and the tools that you've got in place, you've got a bad person in on the system using human intervention. Would that be sort of correct, that those are the kind of the basic parts?
That is correct.
I think over to Mr. Coffey in IT. I wondered if you could provide further comment on what Councillor Ford was looking at was the human side of things. In the report and somewhere else, I mean, we learn there's tools and training going on to try to educate people about this, and we've got some questions about where and when people are learning that. But in general, I mean, this is not a new concept, and they're not specific to the City of Toronto. Could you give some comment on, how much of a barrier it is to doing more on that front? Can you get prepackaged training? Can you get videos easily? Can you find systems? Surely we're not reinventing the wheel, and do you see this as a very difficult thing to try to advance, given some of the concern brought forward by the committee?
Yeah, through the chair. So one of the main, one of the biggest risk elements associated with cybersecurity is people within the organization, and a lot of it is actually innocent in the context of people not realizing maybe if they open a particular email and click on a link that they're going to cause some kind of an outcome that they don't want. So in terms of the barriers to awareness, the program that I talked about, and it's articulated at a high level in the report, is about, it is part of the city's e-learning system. It's integrated in with the, it's not something the city is developing the content for, so we're acquiring it through a service to give us ongoing evolution of content. The actual training itself is all through videos, and there's elements in there so that people can apply at different levels within the organization as well. So what I mean is some of it would apply to everybody, and other would apply to specific areas. An example, even IT people that do work in IT. So it's meant to be across the board, and it is something that it will allow us to continue to grow as this area potentially gets more complex.
And I guess the last question, Madam Auditor, would it be fair to say that investors in the city, people that buy bonds, that give us credit rating, that think about the city's finances, also consider the risk profile of the city? And in your opinion, is cybersecurity, even though we have to be very careful about the details that we're disclosing, cybersecurity falls into that, and although there may be cost to deliver training programs, the rebuttal is the training programs are an investment because they change the risk profile of the organization, and there's actually real savings to be found in the cost of borrowing money and the reputational costs towards the city should there ever be an incident. And at the end of the day, we're investing back into the system, and that produces monetary savings. Would I be correct in my assumption?
There's a lot in there, Councillor. I'll just answer very basically. IT security is fundamental to the risk profile of every single organization, every corporation. Management has a plan that they're executing. My concern is I think it's important to do it as quickly as possible. But to your point, the stronger we are, I think it has impacts across the board, not only potentially in insurance, but also in preventing the impact of an attack.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on the matter? Seeing none, we'll go to speakers. Anyone wishing to speak to this item? Councillor Fillion.
I don't have a motion because this is coming back anyway in October, but I am, I would say, extremely concerned that I don't know what number we were at, and obviously it's oversimplifying to say, where are we out of 10, but I gather we were something pretty low in 2016 when the Auditor General was able to get into the system fairly readily, and that we're somewhere between a 7 and 8 now, several years later, is not encouraging, nor is it encouraging that we'll be above 8 in 2020. I think this requires a lot more of a sense of urgency, and I think as far as motions to deal with this subject, I think I'll wait till we see where we're at in October, but I'm greatly concerned.
And just to confirm, Councillor Fillion, you had indicated desire to move the supplemental report,
sorry.
and the recommendations contained in there.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Councillor Ford, you wanted to speak?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will be brief, but, so first I'll place.
You have a motion?
Yes, I do.
Just check.
I will place my motion. That the Audit Committee recommends that City Council request the City Manager in consultation with the Chief Information Officer to implement appropriate cybersecurity training, which will be mandatory for all city staff. I think a request is appropriate because the motion was just worded in the last 10 minutes, and of course we want to see how that affects stuff. So I think the request part would be appropriate here. And what I would have to say, and I would echo my colleagues' comments, is that in this day and age, I think cybersecurity is a huge concern facing a number of different organizations, businesses, governments, and whatnot. And by no means am I remotely an expert or know enough about this, but I think I share the concern Councillor Fillion does. And even what prompted my question was even this morning as I came in and I was checking my emails, I got this weird email and tell me, well, click here, and it was convincing, and then I kind of stopped after reading the report. So I think when you have city infrastructure that you're dealing with, I think we all have to be very mindful, and with, I think it's 50-somewhat thousand employees in the City of Toronto, I think that is something that should probably be brought to everyone's attention a little more so. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. On Councillor Ford's amendment, all those in favor? And on the balance of the motions, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. We're now on to AU 3.12. Pardon me. We're on to AU 3.13. Audit of city cleaning services, outstanding recommendations of greatest concern. Councillor Ford, you'd held the item.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just get my mind wrapped around where we are here. Okay, yes, I do have questions to staff. So maybe I'll just begin. So how, with this, how we are consolidating, I know we consolidated 6 separate custodial contracts across 71 locations into one agreement. I think there's always talk about how we can get better value for, on the dollar in certain things. Are we taking a holistic approach, not just particularly with cleaning contracts, but across our city when purchasing and looking at that stuff?
Through the chair. Yes, we are, not just on cleaning contracts. I can speak in terms of the facilities management or the corporate real estate aspect of things. We are engaged with other divisions who may be procuring similar services or goods. One example is a recent contract that we had awarded with respect to elevating devices, escalators and elevators, that incorporated both city divisions as well as an agency as well, Exhibition Place. So we are taking that approach.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, thank you. And so in the report, well, recommendation number 3, and this is recommendation number 3 has not been done and is to be done, is that correct?
Yes, so both recommendation 3 and 9 are in progress. We have taken action on both. We are in the process of implementing across our entire portfolio in terms of contracted services. So as you had mentioned, we had taken steps to consolidate 6 contracts into one agreement. We are taking further steps to apply that, to have one standard agreement across the board for all of our contracted services, at which point we feel we would have these recommendations as fully implemented.
And my question on particularly performance-based cleaning levels within the contract, could you expand on that?
So currently, we have 3 separate contracts and they all have different standards within them, and that's what we're trying to align. But in terms of the performance-based, what we're speaking to is we want to focus on what the outcomes are as opposed to the frequency of tasks that are being performed. So our portfolio is very varied in terms of our buildings, different requirements in different types of buildings. We have offices, yards, emergency service facilities, all requiring different levels of service. So we want to focus on what the outcome is. It'll allow us to better manage, and it'll allow us to ensure we get the outcomes that we want. On a frequency-based perspective, the vendor may perform the frequencies asked, but we may not receive the outcome that we actually want. So this is where the industry is going, and this is where we want to go.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Fillion.
A question around contracts, and I will not delve into anything that I think should be private. So what are the length of our contracts around these services?
So through the chair, currently we have, typically what we've done is we've had contracts that are up to 5 years and could be option years that are exercised after the first year at the city's discretion. In some cases, we do have, as the elevating devices contract I referred to, it is a 5-year term contract without options. But of course, there are opportunities should issues arise throughout the contract for the city to end those agreements if we choose.
Or there's opportunities to do what?
Sorry, to end those agreements if we choose.
So we have the ability to end an agreement early if we want?
Each contract would have different terms, but I would say in most contracts, generally speaking, there is language that would allow that.
And is there language that would allow us to amend a contract?
I'm not sure. I don't want to speak. Yes, sorry.
Okay, I'll sort of cut to the chase. What I'm trying to get to is, since July 2016, how many contracts have come up for renewal? And if they haven't come up for renewal, would there have been a way of implementing these changes in any event by mutual agreement or some such?
So through the chair, I believe on the 2 contracts, we have extended renewals. So we had focused our efforts on combining those 6 contracts into one, and that took us right through into 2017. We have extended the other 2 contracts. From a resource perspective, we made some changes in the division to centralize some of our quality assurance and contract management practices. We were focusing on that, focusing on delivering on the one larger contract that we had issued to ensure that it is managed properly. And so now we're at the point where we're ready to try and combine all contracts under one agreement.
So in reading your report, it makes it sound like, well, we couldn't implement all this because of the contract, but I'm not at all clear on that. It sounds like you had opportunities to change them. You had opportunities to implement. It wasn't contractual constraints that has caused you not to implement the recommendations. Would that be correct?
I would say yes, it's both resource-based and contractual-based.
And explain the resource, well, I think we've dealt with the contract-based, so you could have made the changes, that it wasn't the contracts that stopped you because they've either been renewed or you could have done something else. So I think we covered that unless I misunderstood it. So what's the resource issue?
So that's bringing the right resources to centrally manage these contracts. It would be quite large. To change them all at once would be quite a task. We also have engagement with divisions in terms of what the requirements are at these various facilities. We'd have to work through those in terms of changing the standard level of service that's being provided from what they're currently receiving to what they would be receiving. So we have to consider that when we look at amending our contracts or entering into new agreements that would be significantly different than what we currently have.
So can you quantify those resources either in salaries or outside resources, whatever, in order to If it's resources that's holding you up, what resources and what's their value?
So we were making changes within the division to centralize some of the functions such as contract management, quality assurance, things of that nature. So over the past couple of years, we have created some new roles. We're in the process of hiring some of those new roles, and at the same time, working on ensuring that the larger contract that we entered into is being managed accordingly, and now planning on a new call to market, as we stated in the report, to consolidate all into one. So
I'm running
they're all
out of time, and that really doesn't answer my question. I'm looking for like a number of people or a dollar amount, and I want to compare that to the savings, but perhaps I can do a second round.
I'll check with the committee members. Are there anyone else wishing to ask questions on this? Okay, so what we'll do is
What I'm trying to get to is the cost, the resource cost of making the changes versus the savings resulting from the changes. So if you if you can spend $5 to create annual savings of $10, it makes no sense that you wouldn't spend the $5 as soon as you can. I don't know what the ratios are here, but that's what I'm trying to get at. If someone could answer.
Just through the chair, I mean, I don't have that with me right now. We could work on that and provide that to you.
Okay, so I'm just,
Do you want to do a second round and take a moment to, or do you want to carry straight through? I think the committee is supportive of additional questions.
I'll do it, if there's someone else that I'd welcome them going, taking a crack at it.
Councillor Nunziata, you wanted to ask some questions, and maybe we can come back.
I think I heard that, that the contracts are for 5 years, correct? And
Through the chair, each contract would be different. We would have option to go as long as 5 years in some cases. In some cases, they are 5-year terms.
so when Councillor Fillion was asking questions, so there's a clause in the contract that within the 5 years, if we have an issue or a performance issue, that we can terminate the contract?
Through the chair, yes, there would be language in the contracts for if there was a performance issue that we could note the contractor in default and terminate the contract.
Without a penalty?
Well, through the chair, we would do that in consultation with legal to ensure that we're protecting the city's interests.
Okay, so just on recommendation 9, about controls to monitor actual services delivered and cleaning hours provided are in accordance with contracts. So explain that. Recommendation 9?
Through the chair, that recommendation was given from the Auditor General through the audit process. I believe it was in relation to some work that they had done to test to compare hours that were paid for on an invoice versus actual hours received. And I'll welcome the AG's office if they want to add or elaborate on that at all.
So, through the chair, the original recommendation for that audit, and that recommendation was because when we were trying to go back to source documents of hours spent to clean, it didn't match the hours that were being charged.
Okay, so they were working less hours than what they were getting paid for?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's correct.
But who monitors that? Like, why would it be part of the Auditor General's recommendation? Like, was that not monitored, through the contract?
Did you want management to talk about their process, or did you want the comment from the auditor's office? Just want to get the right person to answer the question.
Well, whoever wants to answer the question.
We'll take comment from either management about who monitors the accuracy of the hours.
Yeah, so I can.
Process.
I can start from management's perspective. I think we acknowledge the AG's findings, or the AG's office's findings in that case, although we do obviously ensure, validate the work performed versus what we're paying for in some cases. And in this particular case, there were hours that could not be verified. And some of the steps that we've taken to date, as noted in the report, is to ensure stronger language in terms of the city's ability to obtain supporting information that would justify the hours billed. And we've realized that on our latest contract, and we'll continue to strengthen those controls through the contract and through our oversight to ensure that we are paying for what we are getting.
Okay. I guess we go back to the tree pruning, right?
Councillor Fillion, did you want to do additional questions the second round, or?
I have a motion that,
So we'll go to speaking?
yes, the staff are still,
Okay. Let me just check. Were there any other members of council that wanted to ask questions on this item? No.
I can speak, I guess I can speak while the motion's being prepared, if you would like, or,
We okay to modify the procedure? The clerk needs about 2 minutes to type that up, and it's all right. Well, we'll go with the speaking, and then we'll have the motion on the screen.
thank you. So,
Go ahead.
I guess I'm not satisfied with the answers, or I think there's really a lack of any kind of detail or proper explanation on why this hasn't been done or when it will be done. And I think I'm really glad that this one came forward. I think we need to look at it again. So I have a motion that this come back to the next meeting, and I'm asking for a whole lot of additional detail that would either substantiate good reasons why these recommendations haven't been implemented, or if there isn't a good reason, we would see that, and I guess most importantly, have a plan to get these recommendations implemented as soon as possible, because if it doesn't, the two reasons given were, it's the contracts, which turns out to not be the case, but again, that's my impression. Can't substantiate that because I don't have the details, or it's lack of resources, in which case, what resources exactly, how much would those resources cost, and compare the cost of those resources to the potential savings, because it makes no sense to me that 3 years after we have this report that we haven't realized the savings that would have been available. And I'm also asking the Auditor General to comment further if she wishes.
So I know the clerk's just trying to get this one right, so I think it's best we just stand it down. We'll go to the next item. Were there anyone else wishing to speak on the item? Sorry, Councillor Ford, was that a nod? No? Okay, so I think it'll go pretty quick once we come back to it. I think they just want to get the wording right of the motion. So with that, we'll stand that down. We'll go to the next audit item, which is AU 3.14, opening doors to stable housing. An effective wait list and reduced vacancy rates will help more people access housing. I do know we have a presentation, but we also have a speaker. Generally, the order will be the speaker to go first. Did I get that right? Yeah. Presentation. Yep, clerk's reminded me it's the speaker first. So if I could ask Mark Richardson to come to the front. Mark, you've got some technical help there? Yep, okay.
Okay, councillors, thank you for your time today. I'm Mark Richardson from housingnowto.com. We are a pro bono civic tech open data advocacy organization. Since the mayor announced his Housing Now file last fall, we have been specifically focused on getting better data, better information, better clarity around challenges that exist in the city around housing, particularly in the affordable housing area. All of our contact information is there. We encourage you to visit our website if you're interested in the Housing Now proposal. But today we're here specifically to talk about the challenges you've had with the TCHC waitlist. So our Housing Now proposal, we had pulled together data from all sorts of different sources, including some from TCHC. We had to cleanse all kinds of data. We worked with Map Your Property, with tools from the Evergreen Foundation, and with students from the Ryerson Planning School to create our interactive Google Map tool. It's been launched since January of this year when you adopted Housing Now. We managed to put up that site in January in 6 weeks. It cost us $300 and 30 hours of volunteer time. Since January, we've had 14,000 visits to the site. The official Create TO site around your Housing Now proposal was launched 2 weeks ago. So this is why you need to open some of these City Hall problems up to the public, to the civic tech community to try and get them fixed. I'm kind of surprised that, first of all, let me say thank you to the Auditor General's team. They do a fantastic job of taking the minutia and the arcane stuff of the way the city actually operates under the covers and getting it up to the surface. The presentation they're about to give you is really, really good. There's a video in it that's really, really good. I'm a data visualization guy in my professional life. They've got some great data visualizations. We have to communicate the problems of this city to a grade 4, 5, or 6 student who is doing their social studies homework. If we can't explain it to them, we can't explain it to anyone. A 37, 40-page black and white staff report with no pictures, no charts, no graphs is absolutely useless to fixing this city. Specific to the TCHC staff report, we started asking about the data quality, data metrics, client relationship management of the TCHC Housing Connections waitlist in 2014. And we were brushed off, blown off. Certain councillors told us we shouldn't even be asking that question because it was important to have the 100,000 waitlist number when we go asking the province for money. If we don't know what the problem is, we can't fix it. This was a TCHC staff report in 2017 that talked about their wait list at the time. Offers were then made to the applicants on the wait list. There were 19,000 offers made in 2016. 14,000 of those were withdrawn because the applicant could not be contacted. That was 70-some% garbage data. We on the outside knew that and tried to express that up through the chain of command here in 2016, 2017, by just reading your staff reports. We shouldn't be here in 2019 waiting for an auditor's report. The response you had to this report was to send it away for another staff report. Like, put a bullet in this stuff and fix the problem. I've got 1 minute and 10 seconds left. So how do we fix the problem? There are organizations like ours at housingnowto.com, like Civic Tech TO, like Civic Hall, like Tech TO, which meets every month. Open up this problem. This is not rocket science. People are doing contact management. They're doing heartbeat checks on their clients. This is a success factor, a Hybris solution from SAP. It's a Salesforce solution from Salesforce. It's like the technology exists. We're trying to run one of the most critical systems in our city, which is horribly underfunded in your budgets, because TCHC waitlist is terribly funded. No one's ever put any money into fixing it. And we've now reached a point where we've got, I think this, from the auditor's report, 50-some% garbage data or questionable data that hasn't been validated in over 2 years. I could stay here and talk some more. Hopefully you have some questions for me. This is not an impossible fix, but it is impossible if we keep acting like it's 1974 around here. That's my time.
Thank you very much. Are there questions of the speaker? I'm going to ask you some questions then.
Certainly.
I know Councillor Matlow is probably get to some questions because he's working on them now.
I am wearing my City of Toronto open data button.
Right?
Because I was part of the open data team.
That's where I'm going with it.
Put it together, and I really love your motion from yourself and Mr. Matlow this morning on the financial statements.
Thank you. So the question I have for you is, we do these hackathons, right? There are some really neat things going on from an innovation perspective. How do we traverse the difficulty in this case where you've got really, really personal information in these waiting lists? Are there easy mechanisms to try to cleanse that? And can you tell us a little bit how it could work? And what I was thinking about the other day when I was exploring this report was, could we attach a key to the generic records and then have that key somewhere else that could hold the private data?
It doesn't need to go blockchain. It doesn't need to be that fancy. We can scramble the names, birth dates, and current contact information of people as long as we can unscramble them when you get that data back. You guys know about the Phoenix payroll system in Ottawa, right? That's all personal information. It's person's social security numbers, it's their payroll, and it's federal civil servants caring about their own paychecks. It got screwed up because of data quality. People on the TCHC waitlist we don't care about as much, so we don't invest in it. But in the Phoenix example, what they have done at Treasury Board is they have gone out to vendors, had the vendors or civic advocacy groups sign non-disclosure agreements, and they're doing, rather than coming up with a new list of requirements, going out to the market, they go with a problem and they say, let's do a bake-off. We'll pre-qualify 6 or 7 organizations who will be pre-qualified to come back to us with a solution of data quality for this wait list. The auditor can set whatever the targets are for what's an acceptable failure rate on contact. You get those people together, but it blows up your entire procurement system because you're still trying to buy software and services and technology like the Russian train schedule of 1974. Fundamentally, the way you operate as a city has to change. You had a chief transformation officer. What did he do in 2 years on the TCHC waitlist? You've got an innovation office downstairs with $500,000 a year from Bloomberg. Why weren't they pointed to the TCHC waitlist? This is an eminently fixable problem if you change the way you deal with problems around here.
So there's a couple of vectors or tentacles on this. One of them you touched a little bit on around innovation or around how you, assuming the data is okay, how you work with that.
Never assume the data's okay.
No, but I'll talk about that in a moment. But once you had something that was a useful bucket of data, you take that data and you look at it in different ways, you visualize it, you look at different relationships, you do innovative things with it because we've got a raw starting block and you've got opportunities to take it to innovators.
Yep.
So that's one, and my assumption is there's lots of opportunity to go down that path and lots of different models. And then there's the other tentacle of you've got to go out and validate the data. The raw list is 105,000 or 107,000, just going by memory, lines on there. Part of that is going to be physical work, unless you've got another solution. Like at some point, you've got to go and contact the person. You got any thoughts on that, on how to cross that physical work bridge?
Okay, so this may be totally apocryphal, and somebody in the staff can tell me whether this is true or not, but in the current Housing Connections database, it is our understanding, based on information that we've been provided, that there is still a column that is active and populated for pager number.
Wow.
We need to, I'm not saying burn this thing to the ground, but we kind of need to burn it to the ground and start over again. If we want to find out where people are who need the housing, Why can't we have their Facebook account in there? Because if they change address or they change phone, their Facebook account sticks around. And I know there's people all over the city who just freaked out at that suggestion because it's some American company. But we can talk to people who are in the contact relationship management business, social connections. There are people who, I volunteered Out of the Cold. There are homeless guests who come to our Out of the Cold who tweet their thanks to us, who post on Facebook to say, thank you for giving us a place last night.
I'm going to ask you one last one, just because I got 3 seconds left. Do you think there's agencies out there that could help us and validate the list? And as radical as it sounds and as ironic as it sounds, like a collection management company that's in the business of finding people. Do you think there's ways to do
There
it?
certainly are agencies like that, but they're probably in the revenue generating kind of business. You almost need to crowdsource it. If you were to, when you guys released the the garbage app, the Waste Wizard, I have never seen so many ads in TTC stations, ads on TV. I think all the councillors tweeted about it, because if people are more efficient with their garbage collection, you guys save money. What's the return on investment in fixing this wait list? You called 19,000 people, 14,000 of them didn't answer the phone. How many staff member days got burned calling wrong numbers? Like Toronto has never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. This is landed in your lap. It's a contact list with some control parameters around it. We're not trying to figure out the Apollo landings here. This is so simple. But you need to fundamentally change the way your IT folks deal with the civic tech world. You need to change the way your procurement folks deal with procurement. You need to put a gentle collar around your privacy lawyers who still aren't very flexible on civic tech. We can fix this problem. We're happy to help. And like I said, we're cheap as chips. So please give us an opportunity to do some good.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher,
Good morning.
we'll vary the procedure a little bit there.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
We'll be graceful.
Thank
We're
you.
nice.
You're a very good chair. Thank you very much. There's 106,000 applicants on the wait list, but from what you're telling us here, of being unable to get in touch with people, that might not be accurate.
You'd have to take that up with the Auditor General. That's their number, not mine, and you're paying them, not me.
Well, no, I think my question is, you're indicating that there's issues being in touch with people.
I'm not indicating that. The Auditor General's team is indicating that based on the numbers in this report. This is a TCHC staff report. There's charts and graphs and all sorts of information about how bad the contact information is in your current system from the people you pay to give you this kind of information. That's why I wanted to speak after the Auditor General, because they've got the key points. We were just offering to help.
Councillor Fletcher, thank you.
I don't believe that's what I said, but we may have lost something in translation.
We'll go to Councillor Matlow. I know you want to ask some questions of the speaker.
Is there anybody else who does?
I think.
Thank you. I'm just working on a motion.
It kind of looks, like that really short one that got moved by Councillor Holiday, I think. Open the doors.
Yeah, it's reflective of that kind of idea, but maybe even a little more. Anyway, you'll see in a moment. This is admittedly somewhat rhetorical, but if you could just add, why is it important? We often find out, whether it be through a newspaper article or through our AG, that something's gone wrong and things need improvement. Why do you think it's helpful and important to have as much data out there in the public domain for people like you and others to review and comment on, so that there's this constant accountability? out there? I mean, why do you think that's helpful?
I don't know the quote exactly, but I think it's the Secretary Treasurer of the state of Massachusetts. And they said something about a year ago about their open data program, is that it had changed, fundamentally changed the way they operated and the way they thought about numbers. You're not just putting it out there for nerds like me, you're putting it out there for every university professor who can suddenly, our lab course this month at Ryerson DMZ can be an exercise in fixing the TCHC waitlist. You can't hire the kind of talent that is sitting around looking to do stuff. The Toronto Police Service and TCHC both had data analyst positions posted about 6 months ago. The position for the police service, who is doing an excellent job on their data analytics, the first-year guy just out of university was being paid just under the Sunshine List at $99,000. The TCHC job for a similar set of skills was a union gig at $33 an hour somewhere up near York University. You can't pay for the talent you want. There's lots of talent in town at SAP, at Shopify, all over the place, who would be happy to spend some pro bono hours. There's a lot of companies that would spend pro bono hours. That's why it's important. You suddenly quadruple the size and you half the age of your IT department. Thank you.
I'll just check, are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
What I will do is welcome the audit team up. I know that there's a presentation on this particular report.
Thank you, Chair and Audit Committee. This is one of the most disturbing files I have ever worked on in my career. The issues are too important. They're too easy to fix. Mr. Richardson is not wrong. And the city and TCHC has known for a very long time. City Council has pointed out through the Mayor's Task Force, and then through follow-up with the Mayor and City Council in 2017 again, that there were issues. And I've heard it all. I have heard we need a system, a system, a system. People can't wait for systems. It's great to continue on to have a system. We used an Excel spreadsheet. And some people may find it condescending and say, well, it's not as simple as a spreadsheet. You're correct, it's not. But people can't afford to wait. And then I've heard about process. And I think if I hear any more about process and bureaucracy, people are not housed. Families are not housed. Homeless people have passed away. It's so important for me to maintain my independence. This file was very challenging. The medical officer who's here has reported that good quality housing and stable housing is key to promoting population health and making sure that there is no health inequities. And City's Housing Opportunities Action Plan has pointed out the importance of health education and the importance of housing in influencing a good start in life. We are doing a series of projects along the housing continuum to feed back to City Council what is actually happening, because the challenge in getting the data and cleansing the data, as you've heard, is crazy. The information is not always as it seems, and we have to do a lot of work behind to verify our numbers. But the projects we started with was, first one was moving forward together. We have this one, we thought, looking at the wait list, the front end, after it's been pointed out a couple of times that there were issues, we thought this would be a very easy one, and I personally thought, how hard can a wait list be? And we actually didn't do the audit in 2015, 2016, because we were relying on the task force, which was the right thing to do. The recommendations that came out of the task force around this area were sound recommendations. And then we're doing other work in other areas. And as you can see, there are over 100,000 applicants, households, that are looking for stable housing. But each year, only about 2,900 households are successful. And to put that in perspective, the reports pointed out perhaps about 1,500, so out of 3,000 that are successful in obtaining rent-geared income housing, we've identified potential at least 14 to 1,500 more. And that's even factoring in not having a 0% vacancy. So there's a lot more room there. Our audit was looking at making sure there's timely and equitable access and that those in the greatest need were being efficiently served. And we're looking to make sure that the time to fill units was short enough so that you need to have a bit of time to turn a unit over. But they shouldn't sit there for a long period of time, and you shouldn't have trouble. There's enough demand out there to fill a unit. You have to make sure you're primed and ready to go. We wanted to make sure that that was happening, and we wanted to make sure the city was complying with legislation. So we have 4 key themes, and we have a video to show you. The 4 key themes were we were looking at the data. The data is the list. It's really 2 things: the list of applicants, but it's also the number of units that are vacant, and making sure that you know both numbers. The second was prioritizing the applicants to make sure that those in the most need did receive housing. The third was making sure there's better use of any other housing units that we could find. And the fourth was making sure there was integration and strengthening controls. And one of the things I found was that this area is a lot more complex. I found it hard to navigate. I found it hard to find all the rules. So I think about people who are already in a challenging situation, trying to navigate their way through. There should be one door to come to, make sure that their information is updated and that they can be supported to gain housing if they are the person who is selected to be in a home. So Anna, if you could just run the video to give a summary of what we found in the background on the system. Housing affordability is a big challenge in Toronto. The high cost can sometimes force families to choose between paying rent and putting food on the table. There simply isn't enough. Here's the IT.
Yeah, the output.
Sorry about that. So maybe while we're getting the technical difficulties up, we'll describe some of the problems that we had with the data by way of example. We talked about putting out maybe 30, 40, 50,000 offers and not receiving a response. We had Chris Kringle, Santa Claus was on the list. He was sent a letter to verify his status, make sure he had all of his records updated, and when it was returned to sender, he stayed on the list until we identified that he's an active record. We had people who had passed away. We had people who were over 100 years old, probably about 30 of those. And so if you're doing it based on age, or you're doing it based on some other parameters, if you're sorting, all you have to do is sort the spreadsheet, and you see that maybe there's missing information, maybe their ages are out. You know, if you're determining who gets into a unit based on certain parameters, then if the information is wrong, they may not get priority. So we'll start the video now. Sorry for the delay. Housing affordability is a big challenge in Toronto. The high cost can sometimes force families to choose between paying rent and putting food on the table. There simply isn't enough subsidized housing stock to meet demand. Over 100,000 households were on the waiting list in 2018, and just under 3,000 were housed. We wanted to see whether the waiting list system is fair, equitable, and as efficient as possible. When people apply for rent geared to income, they're applying to live in one of 64,000 subsidized housing units in Toronto. Rent for RGI is capped at 30% of income. The city subsidizes the rest. Anyone can apply to get on the waiting list, and people applying must select both the size of the unit and the building where they want to live. When a provider has a vacancy in the building, they generate a list of applicants who have applied for that building. The provider then contacts each applicant in the order that they appear on the list. Income eligibility is checked at a later time. The Auditor General found that only 13% of all offers are accepted. In many cases, applicants cannot be reached or decline offers. Having to make so many offers before one is accepted slows down the process of filling vacant units. Management estimates that the city spent $7 million on vacant RGI units in 2018. Improving the quality of contact information on the waiting list and checking eligibility earlier will increase the likelihood of reaching an eligible, interested applicant so that vacancies can be filled faster. Priority applicants have a significantly shorter time to wait. The Auditor General found that the people who fit the priority category are not always given priority in the system. For example, we found over 3,000 households on the waiting list with a shelter listed as their main address, but 2/3 were not flagged as homeless, so they won't get priority. The Auditor General also found that no other factors are used to prioritize applicants. So the city should consider more rules to ensure that applicants in the most need get prioritized first. Despite the high demand, we found many units sit vacant. While some clients live in emergency shelters, some social housing units are being used for other purposes. The city should explore other options for these units so that families without a home can be housed in them. With even a 50% improvement in the vacancy rate, an extra 2,200 people could access RGI assistance. The Auditor General found some social housing units have been sitting vacant for a long time, waiting to be demolished and rebuilt as part of a revitalization. There may be an opportunity here to gently refurbish these units to use them as emergency or transitional shelter. That would have to be explored a little bit deeper. The Auditor General has made 28 recommendations to help the city open doors to subsidized housing for more people. Some recommendations are for the short term, such as breaking down barriers to fill vacant units immediately. Some are for the medium term, such as reviewing priorities for RGI, and some are for the longer term, such as implementing a better tool to manage the wait list. To find out more, visit toronto.ca/audit. Thank you, and I'll ask my Assistant Auditor General to continue with the presentation, to unpack a bit more information.
If we can just hold there for a moment, I just want to do a bit of housekeeping. We're at 12:18. You're going to need a few more minutes to continue the presentation. I would just want to check with the committee if there's a desire to extend the meeting to keep the momentum on this item. I understand from Councillor Ford, the last item that's held should be fairly quick. We have one other item in addition that should also be fairly quick. I think Councillor Fillion, we've got the wording of that motion worked out. So we'll just do a check with the committee if we're okay to extend. Are there any concerns with that?
The one concern is that I have scheduled meetings at 1 o'clock. So I could go into the lunch hour for half an hour, but I do have commitments that I just couldn't, at this short, with short notice, reorganize.
What's the will of the committee here? Do we want to break for lunch, or do we want to extend? I'm flexible either way.
Do you want to just push it up until a few minutes before 1 and see how far we get and see if we finish it or not?
Okay. Yeah, there's only 3 items left. I guess we could quick release the item that Councillor Fillion has held. And Councillor Ford, I think, do you have questions on the final item?
I do.
So I think we should hold that, and we'll deal with that in order, unless you have another proposal.
If it is the will of the committee to move along, and I'm happy to release it, and maybe it's off to City Council, correct? I mean, it's going
Correct.
to City Council. Maybe I'm happy to deal with it there.
I don't want to take away any rights from you.
But let's see, Mr. Chair, I'd submit, let's continue, I think what Councilor Matlow said, and if it becomes an issue, I'm happy to release. There's
Okay.
other ways of dealing with it.
So we'll deal with Councillor Fillion's item if it's okay with the committee. Just, I know we're in the middle of a presentation, but we have a pause here. Let's see if we can get that quick released. We can just look at, it's item number 13. So this is a report back at the following meeting. All those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? That is carried. Item is amended. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you. So I'll take a motion to extend till 1, and we'll deal with things as we get closer to that. Councillor Ford, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you, Madam Auditor. Please proceed.
Thank you. So just going through each of the 4 themes. The first theme is to improve the integrity of the waiting list data, as the Auditor General has mentioned, to know exactly who is actively waiting and eligible so that units can be filled fairly and as quickly as possible. The centralized waiting list data we received from management included more than 106,000 records. That's 195,000 people. And the city, TCHC, and other housing providers rely on the data to be able to contact people waiting for RGI assistance to efficiently and effectively fill vacancies. What we found was that some of the information contained in the centralized waiting list is inaccurate. For example, incorrect contact information, incorrect income and asset information, incorrect dates and ages, incorrect usage size, duplicate records, and test records. We identified nearly 500 records with very basic indicators of problematic data. Applicant information should be analyzed to identify other potential integrity issues that should be investigated and resolved. In addition, there was a significant number of people, around 25% of the waiting list, 27,000 applicants, where the city doesn't know if they are still interested or eligible for RGI. The Housing Services Act requires the city to determine whether a household is eligible at least every 24 months after being added to the list. And we were unable to identify or verify the exact number of applicants who have not confirmed their interest and who are no longer eligible for RGI assistance, and who should become inactive. This is an area where the city should address, because it's important to know exactly who is eligible and actively waiting, and this allows for a more accurate understanding of who's ready to be housed and more efficient housing placement of applicants when vacancies are available. When a unit becomes available, housing providers contact people off the list to make an offer.
Once a provider contacts an applicant who is eligible and waiting for RGI assistance, the unit still may not be filled due to a low acceptance rate. In 2017 and 18, providers made approximately 47,000 housing offers. These offers were based on a matching of the vacant and available unit to these households' specified preferences. Still, only 13% of offers were accepted. Many applicants could not be reached, did not respond, or declined offers for other reasons. Acceptance rates are low because incomplete, incorrect, or out-of-date applicant information slows down housing providers' ability to reach RGI applicants. In a survey we conducted during our audit, housing providers reported that they would like to see improvements in the accuracy of applicant contact information. And of the 86 housing providers who responded, the top 2 reasons given for not being able to fill a vacant RGI housing unit was no response to messages left or not being able to contact applicants. It's important to have the best possible information so that providers can provide housing as expeditiously as possible. Any delays costs the city. Management estimates that in 2018, the amount of subsidy the city paid to housing providers or the amount of rental revenue lost while RGI units were vacant was $7 million.
So in this area, there's a number of key actions. In the short term, we think it's really important to focus on sections or groupings of people and fill the units accordingly. For example, there's over 200 bachelor units in senior accommodation, and there's a high decline rate, and they've been vacant for a very long time. And the reason they're vacant is TCHC is trying to follow the rules, and actually they're following the rules in relation to offering it to internal clients first. But the challenge is the internal clients are declining, and it's important if something's not working, for example, you have empty units, to look to the central waiting list. So people aged 65 and older on the centralized waiting list, there was 11,700 people who hadn't received an offer in 3.5 years. So on the one hand, TCHC is reporting to us and to council that, and to the board, you know, there's a high decline rate, maybe 50% decline rate by the people age 65 and older, and there may be, because they're internal applicants. But the people on the central waiting list are not receiving the offer. So with this divide of information, the silos, I think it's important to come together, analyze the list, verify information where people can have offers, send out the offers, and fill those units as quickly as possible. The communication, Mr. Richardson alluded to issues with communication. People work, we've noticed a huge number of people have email addresses in their application, texts, cell phones. Leverage that information instead of sending out 70,000 letters. Leverage the information you have to get a hold of people as quickly as possible. Prime the list, so by the time you get down the list, you know people are waiting and the information is accurate. I think it's important to report on outcomes. Every quarter, the outcome should be how many people got housed permanently. Regardless of systems, if people know their job depends on getting people in those units, the way that they approach it might be a little bit more dynamically, urgently, and so I think that starting with the first big win on the seniors portfolio, make sure you get those people housed and then keep moving forward. And then there are opportunities, the province is opening up some legislation in this area. There are opportunities to make any changes if we feel there's changes. So these are all short-term, medium-term. Identify the incorrect applicant information. I know we have systems, and I know we're going to move forward with new systems in a few years. They should have been there, but we've been waiting since 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. We're 2019. City Council was informed in 2017 the incorrect information would be fixed, that everybody on that waiting list would be rent ready, and that didn't happen. So my view is take what you have, use what you have, Identify the people you are sure are not real records, take out those, and really deal with a list that you can use. And deactivate applications where there's no contact, and invite people to reapply or to make their application active. So they're the short terms for item 1.
The second theme is to review whether the city is properly prioritizing applicants and identify new opportunities to assess and rank the need for faster access to social housing and RGI assistance. 4% of applicants are identified as priority and get housing faster. All other applicants are selected from the centralized waiting list in chronological order based on application date. Our key observations are that the city should ensure applicants that are a priority are given priority. For example, we noted that there are 3,250 households waiting for RGI assistance who list an emergency shelter as their current address. 2/3 of these applicants will not receive any priority for RGI housing because they have not been identified as experiencing homelessness in the waiting list information system. Ensuring that those most in need get access is critical and may help to break the cycle of homelessness. Second, the city should review its priority rules. The city's priorities for RGI units and social housing were adopted in 2002 and have not been reviewed since then. For all applicants who are not designated as a priority, the city does not assess or rank the applicant by need. For example, income is not assessed, and information about an applicant's housing circumstances is not collected. It's time for the city to revisit whether additional factors should be considered to ensure RGI assistance is granted based on need. To be able to improve how it prioritizes access to RGI assistance, the city should identify the factors it wishes to prioritize and establish additional rules to enable household providers to select from the waiting list based on those priorities. Examples of factors include income level, adequacy of current housing conditions, and risk of eviction. Third, the city should also consider a more holistic approach to housing to ensure vulnerable applicants are not missing out on opportunities to access subsidized housing. Better integrating the assistance it provides to people experiencing homelessness waiting for RGI assistance. We acknowledge that the city has begun to address this area, and it's evident that more can be done, as illustrated by the example where we found that 2/3 of RGI applicants providing a shelter address are not prioritized for subsidized housing. And fourth, the current supply of RGI housing is not sufficient. Portable housing subsidies can help to address the challenges of not having vacant social housing units. The city should examine how to provide financial assistance to people regardless of where they live. And in doing so, the city may be able to increase the number of households it provides RGI assistance to so that it can meet the minimum prescribed service levels required by the province.
So before I just get to the prioritizing this item 2, just leave it there, Anna, if you could. No, if you can put it on, that's fine. So a couple of items here. First, one of the recommendations we had related to portable housing subsidies, that is consistent with the task force, Mayor's task force on homelessness. The second is, when we're talking about the wait list, it's important to be clear, they don't verify eligibility. That's done, income eligibility, that's done at a later stage. There's 50 people employed to administer the wait list of verifying, for example, that they're a Canadian citizen. That's the kind, and then helping to get people into certain accommodation. 50 people, that's a lot of resources. So we think it's important to focus on making sure that, as we have here, making sure the shelter clients may need more support. Right now, if your home is listed as a shelter address, you are not deemed to be homeless in the system. Even though you have priority, you're not deemed to be homeless. And it's not a question of whether they're ready, because in 2017, SSHA informed City Council that the list is going to be rent ready. These are people who, if you have to flag that they're homeless, in addition to making the homeless shelter the address, this is the important, so you have to make sure, to me, you make sure you verify and you get support to verify that the people who are ready and homeless can get offers, because they do have priority. And then over the longer term, look more into portable housing benefits and improved integration with the homelessness and the shelter.
The third theme is making better use of housing units, including units used for other purposes, opening doors for more people to access RGI housing. The first item on this table is vacant rentable RGI units. Given the high demand for subsidized housing, we would expect vacant units to be filled quickly. Despite this, at the end of 2018, there were around 1,020 vacant rentable units at TCHC that could provide housing for at least 1,600 people in need of RGI assistance. The average RGI vacancy rate at TCHC was 2.29%, and at May 2019, it is management has reported that it's 2.74%, largely due to the return of units held for medical and safety purposes into circulation. We are conservative here. We recognize that some vacant units cannot be rented because of their state of good repair, and we have excluded these from our reported figures. Certain units that TCHD advised as not rentable are not included in our numbers. This includes those units that are held for revitalization that may be demolished or waiting to be rebuilt, or newly built and waiting to be tenanted. Also not included are those that TCHD has identified as uninhabitable or with extensive damage, and buildings that are pending approval to transfer to an agency. TCHC's vacancy rate is not a new concern. In 2017, Mayor Tory asked TCHC to report back on what could be done to fill vacant units faster. And in April 2017, TCHC identified that vacant bachelor units in buildings designated for seniors was an issue because they were hard to fill. TCHC advised that offers for bachelor units with seniors portfolio had a high vacancy rate, and the rate of offered units was being declined was high. Still, this remains an issue to this date. For example, we found that at the end of 2018, approximately 20% or 200 units of the vacant rentable units are bachelor units in seniors designated buildings. Yet in our review of the centralized waiting list, we found that currently there are 11,300 households with seniors waiting for a bachelor unit. On average, they've been waiting for an RGI unit for 3.5 years. And furthermore, over 230 of those households listed have a shelter, list their shelter as their current address. A comprehensive view of the problem is needed to be able to determine whether policy changes or changes to local rules are necessary to facilitate a more effective waiting list and selection of households to fill RGI vacancies. The next item on the table is social housing units that are used for other purposes. In the report, we identify 140 vacant rentable units being used for other purposes like contractors for storage, for recreation programs, or by community programs. If used for their intended purpose, housing, these units could house 260 more people. What TCHC is reporting as the number of units used by contractors has come down. So it has come down, and they're currently reporting 17 as of May, so they are taking action on that front. TCHD, in consultation with the city, should seek out space for these purposes elsewhere in the immediate vicinity. For example, looking to put offices or storages in trailers located on TCHD premises. Or for example, there are community programs where there's a community center located across the street from that building. A review of housing units should be performed to assess what action is needed by the city as service manager and TCHD as housing provider to enable social housing units to serve their purpose of housing. We've been advised that TCHD is actively working to address this situation. And the last item on the table is overhouse. So overhousing occurs when people live in a unit that's too large for their household composition. This typically occurs when there's a change, such as when an adult child moves out, And when this happens, the household ceases to be eligible for the unit they're in and must be transferred to a housing unit suitable for their new household composition. It's an issue because there are tens of thousands of people waiting for access to subsidized housing, and the city doesn't have a complete picture of the number of overhoused tenants. For example, there are 600 overhoused households on the centralized waiting list. We know that in TCHC's internal list, there are over 1,375 overhoused RGI tenants, and that other housing providers are not tracking or reporting their overhousing back to the centralized waiting list. The other part that we wanted to highlight was the possible opportunity to provide relief to the emergency shelter system. As part of the revitalization of certain TCHC communities, TCHC has taken a phased approach to demolishing and constructing its social housing units. Until such time as the building is completely vacated and ready for demolition, more and more units within the building will become vacant as tenants are relocated and will not be rented out to any new tenants. In the past, units have been left vacant for anywhere from several months to more than 5 years while they are waiting to be demolished. Right now, there are 185 units in Regent Park and Lawrence Heights that are currently vacant. We visited 10% of these units during the audit, and in our view, the majority of them are usable. The photos on the slide show a range of those units. All would require a thorough cleaning, and in some cases, minor repairs such as painting. A small portion of the units would require significant work. To be clear, this is about providing potential relief to the emergency shelter system and having the city explore designating the space as emergency shelters. For example, the city spent approximately $47 million in 2018 on hotels to temporarily house families in about 800 hotel rooms. There may be an opportunity for savings if the city is able to leverage these units as a short-term strategy. We recognize this would be complicated, but we feel it is worthwhile exploring.
And just to add a commentary to that, I mean, the first thing we're going to hear is that might be disruptive to the community. My view is that we have families who are in trailers or a blue thing or in a hotel unit, and you have units that have, you know, fridges working, stoves working, but they do need cleaning, and it is complicated because you're going to have to maybe think a bit differently. But there is an opportunity to explore this further. It's not a question of disrupting the community. It's just finding those families that need to have a little more stability to start their lives, you know, moving forward. So we think there's an opportunity worth exploring there for sure.
Okay. The fourth category is to enhance oversight and strengthen controls. These areas are listed on your slide. I'm not going to spend very much time on them.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm not going to spend very much time because they're on the slide and in the report. Of particular note, so these are areas that the city can explore to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of its practices for administering the centralized waiting list and strengthening controls over eligibility reviews, income verification, and calculating RGI assistance. Of particular note, access to housing, so the city's division in shelter support and housing administration does not verify household income or whether the applicant owns a significant, any significant assets. Applicants self-declare income when they apply, and a proportion has not provided this information. Housing providers, at the time of housing and only at that time, verify income, and it may be discovered actually that some of these applicants are not eligible. The city should look to integrate initial and ongoing eligibility reviews and income verification for all housing subsidy programs currently dispersed amongst multiple groups. This will help to improve the efficiency and quality of such reviews. And this may be included as part of or supplemental to work on the Human Services Integration Project. And it is consistent with the Mayor's 2016 Task Force on Toronto Community Housing observation that the transfer of responsibility for the centralized waiting list to the city was an opportunity to integrate the delivery of RGI with other forms of housing assistance as well as other income-tested services. I'd also note that we have started our next audit focusing on ongoing eligibility for RGI assistance. And that's an audit.
And that audit, depending on what we find, because we will be looking at the rent rolls, it may be we identify additional units that have been vacant. So this is just our start. I'm going to just summarize on one slide, but what I can say is there's definitely a higher demand. Even if you clean up the list, you're going to need more housing. So that has to be said. The other thing is that if you wanted to create 1,000 units, you have between 1,000 and 1,500 units vacant. If you wanted to create and build that, that would have cost you $330 million based on the affordable housing estimate. You have an opportunity to break down the bureaucracy and fill those units. It's huge. So we have the findings and recommendations. There are 28 findings. It's important to set priority actions. But I think the most important thing in this report is to focus on the outcomes and weigh success based on the outcomes and not wait another 2 years for a system, not have any more processes, but make sure you be nimble and be successful because it matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. I want to welcome Marianne Bedard as well to the podium. I know that staff also have some slides to present. I'm just going to do a quick time check and a little bit more housekeeping here. Marianne, we've got 15 minutes till we're required to take some action as a committee. Do you think you can make the presentation in that time, or you'll need more?
No, I won't need that much.
Okay, so I'm going to do a time check here now with the committee on procedure. I know Councillor Matlow has expressed a requirement to break at 1. What I'd propose to the committee, I want to keep the momentum on this. Would a 30-minute break from 1 to 1:30 be okay with the committee? That way we can get back here and get back into this item and have the opportunity to ask the questions and speak as we have to. I know, Councillor Ford, you've expressed an interest on the final audit item number 15, and a piece of housekeeping on that is that there's a presentation available but not required. Are there any members that desire a presentation on that? Okay, that's important. I want to make sure that we let the staff know that are responsible for that to have their folks back shortly past 1:30 to deal with that matter, and then we'll have some time for questions on that. So with that, I think what we'll do is we'll go through your slides, and before we get into deeper questions, we'll make a consideration to take a break until 1:30.
Great, thank you very much. So the first thing I'd like to say is that SSHA completely concurs with the recommendations in this report. We feel this will strengthen our oversight function and enable us to assert our role as a service system manager. It will also allow us to consider the ongoing and incremental changes that are already underway that will enhance the customer service experience and maximize our social housing assets. There we go. Since bringing Housing Connections into the city for greater oversight, we have focused our attention on 3 areas. There is a clear legislative framework that governs social housing, and we have been working collaboratively with our provincial counterparts to advocate for change, and we are confident that positive changes are coming and that they will enhance our ability to respond to some of the recommendations that the auditor has made. We have undertaken early and incremental service improvements that are focusing on customer service, and they will facilitate our implementation of an improved choice-based model next year. Some of the specific changes that we have already undertaken, the average of 7 offers that we used to experience because of training and other steps that we've taken, we are now down to about 3.2 offers to fill a vacancy, which is a considerable improvement. We've had targeted outreach to over 25,000 people recently in the last few months to confirm interest to maintain our data integrity. And we are launching a new map-based housing list that allows people to gain additional information such as viewing units, floor plans, neighborhoods, which will allow them to make more informed housing choices. We have a plan to address all the recommendations in this report, and we are on track. It's okay. We feel confident that this report will support and improve our work and will also facilitate Council's direction for us to move forward and modernize the social housing system. That's my presentation.
Thank you. Again, I'll propose to the committee, as I reiterated, I think it might be time to take a break. And I know it'll be a bit of a compressed lunch, but I think we'll come back at 1:30 and carry on with the questions. Thank you.